Chapter 177. Bang. Yi Guqin activated the power of his perfect fleshly body and swung his sword upwards, directly deflecting Shen Miao's horse-chopping blade. However, at this moment, an incomparably sharp sword qi once again rushed over. It was from Murong Ditian. Yi Guqin executed wave-like subtle steps, his figure becoming indistinct like smoke and mist, brushing past the sword qi. However, in an instant, a familiar cold body fragrance assaulted him, and Yi Guqin's heart trembled. Xia Yubing's ice-blue long hair fluttered with her movements, sparkling and translucent. Her cold appearance was exceptional, but her eyes did not have the slightest bit of warmth. She did not unsheath her sword, but pointed with her slender finger. A cold current of sword qi that caused Yi Guqin's expression to slightly change gathered at her fingertip, transforming into an icicle that attacked Yi Guqin's chest. What a vicious method! Yi Guqin's figure suddenly retreated rapidly. Very obviously, Xia Yubing did not attack, but once she attacked, she aimed at the neck, heart and other fatal areas. Can you dodge? Xia Yubing activated a trace of ice sword intent, and the air around Yi Guqin seemed to freeze. Crack! The icicle at Xia Yubing's fingertip landed on Yi Guqin's dragon crystal armor of fire and ice, directly shattering it. However, fortunately, Yi Guqin had activated the strengthening spirit rune, and in addition to the powerful defense of the dragon crystal armor, he was not killed by Xia Yubing's finger. Bang! In the next instant, the surface of Yi Guqin's body erupted with raging heavenly sun profound underworld fire, directly dispersing much of the surrounding freezing cold air. The Dugu Wubai that I have transformed into does not have any deep enmity with Xia Yubing, and yet she can still act so viciously. Yi Guqin thought coldly in his heart. From this, it could be seen that Xia Yubing's character was already cold to the point of being emotionless. For the sake of eliminating a hidden danger, she spared no effort. Rumble. However, now was not the time to think. Behind him, Shen Miao once again attacked with his horse-chopping blade. The horse-chopping blade whistled through the air, chopping down towards Yi Guqin's head. Mountain Saber Technique, 5 Mountain Heavenly Slash. The power of Shen Yang's blade was like the 5 peaks of Mount Tai. As it pressed down, the surrounding air emitted an extremely compressed, ear-piercing shriek. Yi Guqin stimulated the Dracophant force in his body, and at the same time, he poured the power of Azura into the falling star flexible sword. God-slaying sword technique, massacre. Blood-red sword light swept towards Shen Miao. It wasn't just one, but 3 at the same time. Shen Miao had also heard of how powerful the god-slaying sword technique was. His saber force collided with the sword radiance, and an earth-shaking buzzing sound erupted. Mysterious heaven sword art. On the other side, Murong Ditian once again displayed the Murong family's spirit-grade sword art. Streaks of sword qi broke through the air. It was as terrifying as the might of the heavens, and it could shake one's soul. God-slaying sword technique, Soul Demon. Yi Guqin swung his sword backhandedly, and a dark blood-red sword light tore through the air. Boom! Boom! Yi Guqin and Murong Ditian were both forced to retreat. At the sides, Xia Yubing and Prince Yuanyi attacked again. He was completely surrounded by numerous prodigies. However, Yi Guqin still didn't give up. He activated the dragon armor of ice and fire's defensive power to the maximum. At the same time, a faint golden glow appeared on the surface of his body. He also activated his Vajra physique to the maximum. At the same time, he used wave-like subtle steps to move around the crowd of prodigies. The falling star flexible sword in his hand slashed out streaks of blood-red sword light. True Qi surged in his other hand, and streaks of 6-pulse divine sword light continuously shot out. Puchi. Not long after, those prodigies with lower cultivation were all shaken to the point of vomiting blood. They were heavily injured. However, Yi Guqin wasn't in a good state either. Although his strength was extraordinary, firstly, he hadn't fully displayed his strength. Secondly, Xia Yubing and the other prodigies weren't weaker than him. Because of this, Yi Guqin's situation was getting worse and worse. The dragon armor of ice and fire on the surface of his body was also filled with cracks. It was about to fall apart. Dugu Wubai, that day you casually chased us away. Did you think you would end up like this today? Shen Ao sneered. Seeing Yi Guqin in such a sorry state, he was delighted. Puff. Yi Guqin was once again pushed back by Shinta Miao's blade. His qi and blood were in turmoil. This is a good chance. If I can kill this Dugu Wu Bai, I will definitely become famous. Seeing this, Shinta Ao's heart skipped a beat. He directly wielded his golden battle axe and attacked. He also had ambitions. He didn't want to be overshadowed by Shinta Miao's prodigy halo. Dugu Wu Bai Dai. Shinta Ao gathered all his true qi. His golden battle axe emitted a blinding golden light. It was like a sun as it slashed down at Yi Guqin. However, Yi Guqin, who was retreating, suddenly raised his head. His eyes were scarlet like blood. Not good. Shinta Ao and Yi Guqin's gazes met. It was as if they had fallen into an ice cave. Countless Azura illusions pounced on him, causing the power of his move to decrease by 30%. The one who will die is you. Yi Guqin's feet moved, and the meteor soft sword stabbed out. God-slaying sword technique, demon only. A sword to the throat. Shinta Ao's golden battle axe was sent flying. A large hole was opened in his chest. His heart and other organs flew out. His body crashed heavily on the ground. He couldn't be more dead. Shinta Ao. Shinta Miao's expression changed. Although he and Shinta Ao weren't closely related by blood, they were still from the same family. However, what shocked everyone was that Yi Guqin, who was in a passive position, still had the power to counterattack. The spectators outside the plains were also stunned. This Dugu Wu Bai was even more ferocious than they had imagined. Big brother, you have to survive. In the crowd, in an inconspicuous corner, the little lowly Shui raised her head and looked at the scene in the 10,000 miles sky surveying mirror. Her sparkling and translucent eyes, which seemed to reflect the stars, faintly emitted a bloody brilliance. In the plains, apart from Xia Yubing and a few other great prodigies, the rest of the prodigies with weaker cultivations felt a chill in their hearts when they saw Shinta Ao's miserable death. They weren't much stronger than Shinta Ao. Didn't that mean that Yi Guqin could also kill them with a wave of his hand? Yi Guqin opened the eye of Azura and swept his gaze across everyone. Even Xia Yubing and the others were slightly intimidated by those blood-red eyes, let alone those geniuses whose cultivations were a bit weaker. Apart from Xia Yubing, Prince Yuani, Shinta Miao, and Murong Ditian, the rest of the prodigies were all heavily injured. At this moment, they were intimidated by the eye of Azura, and their battle intent disappeared without a trace. They actually directly retreated, killing the enemy with a single sword strike, intimidating all the prodigies. At this moment, Yi Guqin was holding the meteor soft sword and pointing it at the ground. Blood dripped from the tip of the sword. Even though his armor was cracked and his body was injured, he was still like a god of the sword, standing upright. His bearing caused ripples in the hearts of the prodigies outside the plains, especially some sword cultivators, whose eyes were filled with reverence. I, Dugu Wu Bai, comprehend the Tao with the sword and kill with the sword. Come at me. Yi Guqin pointed the tip of his sword at everyone. At this moment, he felt as if a certain bottleneck had started to loosen up. Kill. At this moment, the four great prodigies looked at each other. They all knew that Yi Guqin definitely couldn't be left alive. Xia Yubing was serious and didn't casually attack anymore. She took out her glacier sword and swung it, causing frost and snow to fill the sky. Glacier sword technique, sky snow scattering splendor. Sword chi turned into flying snow that filled the sky and swept towards Yi Guqin. Mysterious heaven sword technique, sword sweeping 8 desolations. Murong Ditian also used his ultimate technique and 8 fierce sword chi swept out. Mad dragon slash. Red demonic patterns on Shinta Miao's arms trembled, and he slashed down with his heavenly demonic power. It was like a mad dragon roaring in the sky. 5 elements heavenly spear. The heavenly sacred 5 elements wheel in Prince Yuani's hand erupted with extreme brilliance. The power of the 5 elements surged and turned into an illusory battle spear that tore through the air towards Yi Guqin. Facing the ultimate technique of the 4 directions, Yi Guqin stood upright. The forceful pressure of the moves almost suffocated Yi Guqin, but he acted as if he didn't hear it. He closed his eyes and swung his meteor soft sword again. What is this Dugu Wu Bai doing? He closed his eyes. Has he already accepted his fate? All the spectators were shocked. They didn't understand Yi Guchen's intention. One yin and one yang. One hard and one soft. The combination of hard and soft, and the conversion of yin and yang. It's as good as water, but it can penetrate stone. This is the hard and soft sword intent. Suddenly, Yi Guchen opened his eyes again, and a sharp light flashed in his eyes. The killing intent from all directions had already closed in on him. Yi Guchen swung his meteor soft sword, and a mysterious sword intent spread out like a tide. At this moment, the bottleneck of the hard and soft sword intent was completely broken. Chapter 178. As he broke through the bottleneck, Yi Guchen once again comprehended the hard-soft sword intent. Among the 3 grades of sword intent, the hard-soft sword intent could only be considered an ordinary sword intent, but it was definitely not weak. As the sword intent spread out like a tidal wave, the 4 great prodigies' ultimate moves seemed to have sunk into a quagmire. Both their power and speed decreased a little. Because the 4 great prodigies were extremely fierce and sharp, they were affected by the hard-soft sword intent, and their power decreased a little. Yi Guchen took the opportunity to use the wave-like subtle steps and flashed towards Prince Yuanyi. Because among the 4 great prodigies, Prince Yuanyi was the easiest to break through. The only thing that made people wary of him was the heavenly sacred 5-elemental wheel, a high-grade spiritual inscription divine weapon. Oh no! Seeing Yi Guchen charging towards him, Prince Yuanyi's expression changed drastically. The heavenly sacred 5-elemental wheel in his hand once again burst out with a dazzling 5-colored divine light. It spun rapidly as if it was cutting the wheel, and even the air let out an ear-piercing shriek. Go! The heavenly sacred 5-elemental wheel left his hand, and turned into a 5-colored rainbow. Its fluctuation was terrifying as it charged towards Yi Guchen. One could imagine that if this attack hit, it would definitely cause a lot of damage to Yi Guchen. But Yi Guchen's black eyes were like stars, cold and calm. His meteorite soft sword flew out. The blade of the sword was like a snake, becoming extremely soft. At the same time, a strange sword concept spread out. This is... Xiao Yubing's beautiful eyes were filled with surprise. Morong Ditian's eyes also suddenly focused. Whoosh! The heavenly sacred 5-elemental wheel flew through the air, and Yi Guchen's sword landed directly on it. I'm stupid. Prince Yuanyi sneered. His attack was not something that could be blocked so easily. But in the next moment, the sneer on Prince Yuanyi's face completely froze. Yi Guchen's meteorite soft sword drew a soft arc in the air. It did not meet the heavenly sacred 5-elemental wheel head-on. Instead, he borrowed the force of the attack. After turning a circle, he directly returned the attack. Seeing the heavenly sacred 5 elements will turn back and tear the air apart, Prince Yuanyi's face turned pale. He pushed out with his palm, and 5-colored divine light burst out. He wanted to control the heavenly sacred 5-element wheel, but he only heard a boom, and the terrifying sound of bones cracking. Prince Yuanyi spat out a mouthful of blood as he flew backward. His entire arm was broken and twisted at an extremely horrifying angle. The bone stubble pierced through his skin, and blood splattered everywhere. What kind of technique is this? Crown Prince Yuanyi clutched his broken arm with a horrified expression. Yi Guchen did not waste his breath on Crown Prince Yuanyi. He directly broke through and rushed out. Although he wanted to use this opportunity to kill Prince Yuanyi, he would be surrounded and killed by the other 3 heavenly prides if he stayed any longer. Right now, the most important thing was to break through the encirclement. As for this technique, it was naturally brought about by the hard-soft sword essence. To a certain extent, the hard-soft sword essence and the Taiji sword technique complemented each other. They both had the ability to return the opponent's attack. As long as the opponent's strength or attack did not exceed Yi Guchen's tolerance, he could borrow the force of the attack and return the damage. This feeling, it's the power of sword essence. This Duga Wubai has actually comprehended sword essence. Xiao Yubing's beautiful ice blue eyes surged with a cold light. She alone was enough to be a sword Dao prodigy with sword essence, so Xiao Yubing would not allow any other variables to appear. Obviously, Yi Guchen was such a variable. Her beautiful eyes met with Morong Ditian's. Although Morong Ditian had not comprehended sword essence, he was also a sword Dao prodigy, and naturally knew that Yi Guchen had sword essence. Everyone, we must kill him. Otherwise, we will only be his background in this elite gathering. Prince Yuani said in a venomous tone. That's right. Chase after him. Shinta Miao's expression was also serious. The four turned into four streaks of light and chased after Yi Guqin. The Tianhuang plain stretched as far as the eye could see. Yellow sand filled the sky, and it gave off an ancient feeling of desolation. On the distant horizon, a figure moved like a ghost, leaving behind afterimages. It was Yi Guqin. Not far behind him, Xia Yubing and the other three were hot on his heels. I've already reached the central region of the Tianhuang Plains. I don't believe they can keep chasing me. Yi Guqin's heart was cold. He still had not found a cave dwelling that could truly set the stage. Once he found a divine dwelling stage cave dwelling, it would be time for Yi Guqin to truly reveal his identity. This was because he had to use his full strength to obtain a divine dwelling stage cave dwelling from all the participating heaven prodigies. But before that, I still have to get through this tribulation. Yi Guqin sighed inwardly. At this moment, Yi Guqin's eyes suddenly froze. A figure seemed to have appeared not far in front of him. He is. Yi Guqin's heart tightened. The figure was dressed in ink-black clothes and wore a black eye patch. The other eye was as black as an abyss. Yuan Mia. Yi Guqin slowly tightened his grip on the sword in his hand. He had no enmity with Yuan Mia, but Yuan Mia was a heaven prodigy of the Saint Yuan Mansion, and a member of the imperial family. He had some disputes with Prince Yuani. Yi Guqin did not think that Yuan Mia's appearance here was a coincidence. That's Yuan Mia. Behind Yi Guqin, the four great heaven prodigies also saw the figure. It's that bastard. Prince Yuani's face darkened slightly. Haha, Yuan Mia. Are you also here to encircle and annihilate Dugu Wubai? Shinta Tong laughed. Yuan Mia did not say anything. He glanced at Yi Guqin and then at Prince Yuani, who was not far behind him. He slowly raised the sword in his hand. Yuan Mia's sword was not gorgeous, nor did it give off any powerful undulations. It was just a sword covered in blood. Then, Yuan Mia drew his sword. A pitch-black sword radiance, which seemed to carry an aura of destruction, broke through the air. This sword radiance did not have a great momentum. Instead, it was strangely quiet, like a dead night. This is Dark Sword Essence. Yi Guqin's eyelids twitched when he felt the sword essence undulations that Yuan Mia's sword radiated. Although the Dark Sword Essence was also a normal sword essence, its power and strangeness surpassed other sword essences of the same level. Most importantly, Yuan Mia's sword was not aimed at Yi Guqin. Swoosh. This sword radiance, which contained the Dark Sword Essence, shot straight at Prince Yuani. Bastard, how dare you attack me? Aren't you afraid of being punished by my father? Prince Yuani's face darkened completely. The heavenly sacred five-element wheel in his hand burst out a ball of five-element divine light. But strangely, this ball of divine light was silently annihilated when it touched the pitch-black sword radiance. The Dark Sword Essence is indeed strange. Yi Guqin turned his head to take a look, but his speed increased sharply again. Yuan Mia's sword directly stopped the four of them for a moment. I don't want to kill you, Yuan Mia said with a hoarse voice. You want to? Prince Yuani instantly thought of it. Yuan Mia drew his sword to give Yi Guqin a chance to escape, and then let Yi Guqin find a chance to kill Prince Yuani. Because after killing Qin Aoshi, Yuan Mia knew that Yi Guqin was a decisive person. After understanding the cause and effect, Prince Yuani gnashed his teeth in hatred. Your Highness, that Dugu Wubai won't be able to escape, Murong Ditian said. Seeing Murong Ditian, Xia Yubing, and Shinta Miao rush out, Yuan Mia raised his eyebrows, but did not do anything. Although he was strong, it was impossible for him to block all four of them at the same time. Moreover, Yuan Mia could not do that for Yi Guqin. He and Yi Guqin were competitors. Even without me, that Dugu Wubai will still die. You won't achieve your goal. Prince Yuani's gaze was cold as he confronted Yuan Mia. Chapter 179. Yuan Mia's birth mother was a lowly palace maid who was later executed by the Empress, who was Prince Yuani's mother. His left eye was also blinded by Prince Yuani when he was young. Therefore, Yuan Mia had a miserable childhood, which might also be the reason why he comprehended the dark sword intent. If it wasn't for his rare talent in the sword Dao that was discovered by the primitive emperor, he would probably be secretly executed by the empress. Although Yuan Mia was valued by the primitive emperor, it was impossible for him to take revenge. The reason why Prince Yuanyi wasn't afraid of Yuan Mia was because of the primitive emperor's orders. You hope that Dugu Wubai can escape and use him to kill me. Aren't you too naive? Prince Yuanyi's tone was cold, and his eyes were cold. He was the legitimate crown prince of the Saint Origin dynasty, but his talent and cultivation weren't as good as Yuan Mia's. This made him hate Yuan Mia very much. Who knows? If I can kill you, even if there's only a slight chance. Yuan Mia's tone was cold and hoarse. These two half-brothers stared at each other, their eyes filled with deep hatred. On the other side, Yi Guchen was running on the plain as fast as lightning. Behind him, Xia Yubing, Shen Tu Miao, and Morong Ditian were in hot pursuit. How can Dugu Wubai's true qi be so dense? Morong Ditian said in surprise. The three of them were true geniuses, and the range of their qi seas was far greater than ordinary geniuses. But at this moment, they felt like their true qi couldn't support them. Obviously, their true qi was greatly consumed during the long pursuit. However, Yi Guchen's speed didn't slow down at all, and he maintained an extremely fast speed. That brat's qi si is strange. From the power that erupted earlier, his qi si's range is definitely more than 60 meters. Shen Tu Miao's tone was solemn. Xia Yubing squinted her beautiful eyes, but the coldness in her eyes was even more intense. This Dugu Wubai must be eliminated. Such a genius can't be left alive. Xia Yubing's heart was cold. You guys are still very persistent. I wonder how long your real qi can last. Yi Guchen looked back at them. At this moment, he suddenly sensed an unusual aura fluctuation in front of him. Yi Guchen looked into the distance. Even with his temperament, his face stiffened slightly. In the distance, an incomparably wide and pitch-black crack spread out like a wound in the earth. Endless black deathly aura gushed out from the cracks, almost reaching the sky. It seemed to connect the heavens and the earth, forming a pitch-black curtain. Could that be? Yi Guchen's expression darkened. He had asked around before coming to the infinite wilderness plain. In the infinite wasteland plain, there were many known dangerous forbidden areas. Normally, no one would dare to step into such a forbidden area. The abyss-like crack in front of him was one of the most dangerous places in the plains. The bottomless devil abyss. Yi Guchen said in a heavy tone. The bottomless demon abyss was one of the most famous forbidden areas of the Tianhuang Plains. According to rumor, this place was split open by a sword Dao expert, and boundless pitch-black death energy surged out from it all year round. This strange death energy countered life force. Any living being with life force would be devoured by the death energy within a short period of time. Even if some experts could use their vital qi to isolate the death energy temporarily, they wouldn't be able to hold on for long. It could be said that this was a forbidden area that would make people change their expressions when they talked about it. Yi Guchen stopped in front of the bottomless demon abyss. Xia Yubing and the other two also stopped and stood not far from Yi Guchen. The three of them spread out and sealed off the other three directions. Mr. Dugu, it seems like the heavens aren't on your side. Xia Yubing's eyes were cold, and her tone was as calm as water. Morong Ditian and Shen Tu Miao were also looking at Yi Guchen, with a playful expression. Dugu Wubai, you have no way out now. Morong Ditian's tone was very calm. I will remember the kindness of encircling and suppressing you today. In the future, I will definitely repay you. Yi Guchen emphasized the word repay. Then his figure suddenly retreated, and actually escaped into the surging death energy. What? This scene caused Xia Yubing and the others to be slightly shocked. They thought that Yi Guchen would resist with all his might, but in the end he directly jumped into the bottomless demon abyss. The three of them looked at each other. Morong Ditian and Shen Tu Miao were slightly hesitant. They naturally knew of the bottomless demon abyss's ferocious reputation. That death energy made them very fearful. If they weren't careful, they might die inside. If you don't remove the roots, it will grow again when the spring breeze blows. That Dugu Wubai wants to seize a chance of survival. We can't follow his wishes. Are the two of you willing to enter with me? If there's really danger, it won't be too late to retreat then, Xia Yubing said. She was shrewd, and her methods were ruthless. If it was an ordinary person, they might not take the risk to enter and chase after Yi Guqin. However, Xia Yubing had done so. She didn't want to give Yi Guqin a chance of survival. Okay. The three of them had the same opinion. They also jumped and directly entered the bottomless demon abyss. The bottomless demon abyss was bottomless. It was also filled with dense death energy. Ordinary people would be dizzy and disoriented inside. When Yi Guqin jumped in, he erupted with true qi and formed a protective barrier around his body, blocking the death energy's invasion. However, what surprised Yi Guqin was that this death energy was extremely difficult to deal with. When it came into contact with true qi, it emitted a qi sound. Even true qi was being corroded and consumed. Yi Guqin could only continuously erupt with true qi to continuously counteract the death energy's invasion. This bottomless demon abyss is indeed worthy of being one of the forbidden areas. It's also because I have 1,000 feet sea of qi that I can withstand such consumption. If it was an ordinary qi refinement realm practitioner, he would have been engulfed by the death energy in a short while, Yi Guqin thought. At the same time, he sensed that the three auras above had also entered. Is it Xia Yubing's suggestion? Her methods are indeed ruthless, not leaving me any chance of survival. Yi Guqin's eyes surged with a cold light. His figure moved along the cliff of the demon abyss, all the way down. 10 feet, 500 feet, 100 feet. As Yi Guqin went deeper, the death energy in the surroundings became thicker and thicker. It even made Yi Guqin feel pressured. At the same time, Yi Guqin faintly felt that there seemed to be an unknown and terrifying power, hidden in the deepest part of the bottomless demon abyss. It was a kind of feeling that made Yi Guqin's scalp tingle. What exactly is at the bottom of this bottomless demon abyss? Also, it said that this place was cut open by a peerless expert a long time ago. Is that true? Where did this death energy come from? Even Yi Guqin had layers of doubts. Yi Guqin became more and more curious about this bottomless demon abyss and the infinite wasteland. However, it was obviously not the time to think about such things. The three auras above had not yet left. Still holding on? Then let's take a gamble. Yi Guqin's expression was cold and stern. He directly left the cliff and descended vertically. Above, Xia Yubing and the other two surged their true qi to resist the corrosion of the death energy. Then, they immediately felt that Yi Guqin's descending speed had suddenly increased. Does that brat not want to live anymore? If he falls into the deepest part of the bottomless demon abyss, that death energy can instantly corrode his true qi. Shinta Miao's expression changed. This place was already very deep. Even they felt that it was very strenuous, and their faces were slightly pale. If he goes any deeper, it will be dangerous. Murong Ditian's tone was grave, and he was slightly out of breath. That Dugu Wubai's true qi is actually so vigorous. However, he has already fallen into the deepest part of the bottomless demon abyss. Even if he is still alive, he won't be able to hold on for long. We will wait for him outside. If he doesn't come out, he can only die from the death energy in the demon abyss. Xia Yubing's thoughts were very meticulous. They did not continue to go deeper. Instead, they moved upwards, leaving the bottomless demon abyss, and stood guard outside the crevice. At this moment, Yi Guqin was in great danger. Chapter 180. When he sensed that Xia Yubing and the others didn't continue to chase after him from above, Yi Guqin stopped his sudden descent, sticking to the precipitous rock wall. However, the death aura here was already extremely dense. Even with Yi Guqin's vigorous true qi, he couldn't withstand such consumption. Around him, the death aura mixed with his true qi, producing a sizzling sound. The rate of consumption was much faster than before. The lower I go, the purer the death aura. What exactly is at the bottom of the bottomless devil abyss? Could it be that this death aura that can devour life is emitted by something at the bottom of the devil abyss? Yi Guqin's expression was serious. At this moment, he couldn't directly climb up, because with Xia Yubing's meticulous mind, she definitely wouldn't leave directly. Do you want to wait for an opportunity? Yi Guqin didn't choose to return. Instead, he continued to explore to see if there was any other way out. However, in this exploration, his true chi was quickly depleted. Previously, in the battle with the geniuses, he had already used up a lot of true chi. Now, in the depths of the devil abyss, his true chi was quickly exhausted. Finally, some of Yi Guchen's true chi was completely devoured. The pitch-black death aura touched Yi Guchen's arm. Sizzle! In an instant, Yi Guchen felt the vitality of the part of his arm that came in contact with the death aura rapidly draining away. He hurriedly activated what little true chi he had left, and only then was he able to isolate the death aura. Yi Guchen focused his gaze, and saw that the part of his arm was also a patch of death aura, without a trace of vitality. Rumble! Yi Guchen activated his perfect body, and the blood in his body surged, directly surging to his arm. The dead flesh fell off, revealing tender new skin. He had a perfect body. In addition to true chi, his blood was also incomparably vigorous, and his body was overflowing with vitality. However, I can't go on like this. I have to quickly find another way out. Yi Guchen groped around, and another hour passed. The true chi in his chi sea was about to reach the bottom. Finally, Yi Guchen found a cave in the cliff in front of him. His figure flashed, and he directly entered the cave. As soon as he stepped into the cave, Yi Guchen vaguely felt a wave of faint array formation fluctuations. He raised his vigilance, and only after confirming that there was nothing out of the ordinary did he cautiously enter. Although the cave was filled with death chi, it was much thinner than the death chi outside. Yi Guchen pondered. Could it be because of the array that isolated a portion of the death chi? At the same time, he was also very puzzled. This cave clearly had traces of man-made excavation. And this place was already very deep in the bottomless devil abyss. Who would actually excavate a cave here? Yi Guchen had many questions in his mind, but he didn't have any leads for the time being. He went deeper into the cave. Yi Guchen's true chi was nearly exhausted and finally dissipated completely. The pitch-black death chi instantly engulfed Yi Guchen's body. Although the death chi inside the cave was much thinner than outside, it was still not something a chi-refining realm martial artist could withstand. Yi Guchen instantly felt his vitality rapidly drain away. Yi Guchen hurriedly activated the Vajra celestial body, and at the same time, vibrated the chi and blood in his body. The turbulent chi and blood power gushed out, carrying a strong sense of vitality, and consumed each other with the death chi. There's no time. If this goes on, I might really die here. Yi Guchen really felt a sense of crisis between life and death. He even felt that the death chi had already entered his body, and began to frantically engulf the chi and blood power. Just as Yi Guchen was about to die, the Thunder Tribulation Sword in his dantian began to tremble again. Thunder Tribulation Sword. Yi Guchen's eyes suddenly lit up. If there was one thing that was the most mysterious in his body, it would be the Thunder Tribulation Sword that had always been silent in his dantian. Whether it was absorbing the power of ice and fire in the ice and fire Yin Yang Tan, or absorbing the ninth heaven Xian Thunder during the battle with Qin Aoshi, they all relied on the power of the Thunder Tribulation Sword. Even the Nine Tribulations Heart Sutra, and the Thousand Deities Tribulation Sword technique, were brought to him by the Thunder Tribulation Sword. Although he was still unable to control the Thunder Tribulation Sword, there was no doubt that this sword was Yi Guchen's most important trump card and means. As the death chi invaded Yi Guchen's body and even his dantian, the Thunder Tribulation Sword finally trembled a little. Soon after, streaks of dazzling lightning radiance spread out from the Thunder Calamity Sword. They were like numerous spiritual snakes that moved within Yi Guchen's body. All the death chi that invaded Yi Guchen's body was wiped out by the streaks of lightning. Lightning is the power of vitality and yang, while death chi is the chi of the underworld. Could these two powers be natural enemies? Yi Guchen could not help but rejoice. With the protection of the Thunder Tribulation Sword, at least the death chi would not cause any harm to Yi Guchen for the time being. However, he did not dare to place all his bets on the Thunder Tribulation Sword. He immediately sat down cross-legged to recover his chi-si. About an hour later, Yi Guchen's 1,000-feet-long golden chi-si had recovered by 30%. He did not continue to recover. Instead, he wanted to go deeper into the cave to see if there was any other way out. At first, Yi Guchen thought that this place might be a cave dwelling. However, as he went deeper, he only saw primitive stone walls around him. It was very simple and crude. Obviously, it was not a cave dwelling. And I should be reaching the end soon. Yi Guchen was secretly vigilant as he slowly approached. On the ground in front of him, there were some corpses. Their bones were all broken, as if they had been crushed by some kind of brute force. However, although these corpses were already dead, their residual qi made Yi Guchen's expression turn serious. There are some corpses of life and death chamber experts, and even a few corpses of heaven and earth spirit bridge experts. What is in the depths of this cave dwelling? Yi Guchen raised his vigilance to the highest level as he slowly walked into the deepest part of the cave. In the deepest part of the cave, there was only a simple stone platform. On the stone platform, a human figure was sitting cross-legged. The reason it was a human figure was because the figure was too tall. It was close to 30 feet tall, and its head almost touched the ceiling of the cave. At a glance, it had the ferocious aura of an ancient barbarian king. This incomparably tall figure was a middle-aged man. His upper body was bare, and his muscles were bulging. However, there was a deathly gray color on his skin that had been corroded by death qi for many years. On his arms, chest, and other parts, there were vague patterns of divine beasts. What attracted Yi Guchen's attention the most was the beast tooth necklace hanging on his thick neck. In the middle of the necklace, there was a round piece of ancient jade. Those corpses outside, could it be his doing? However, this person has long been corroded by death qi and has no trace of life. How could he kill people? Perhaps they came here together? Yi Guchen had doubts in his heart. However, looking at the tall man, he did not dress like a person from the sect. Instead, he looked a bit like a barbarian. Could this person be an expert from the Five Elements barbarian tribe? Yi Guchen could not help but guess. He looked around and suddenly saw that there seemed to be some small words on the rock wall of the cave. What is that? Yi Guchen walked closer and took a closer look. The handwriting was a little distorted, but it was still distinguishable. The demon sword crossed the sky, swallowing the sky. The Sky Emperor covered the dust, and the universe was destroyed. The demon sword crossed the sky, and the Sky Emperor covered the dust. The Sky Emperor should be referring to the Celestial Emperor sword that hangs above the sky of the South Sky region. To be able to make the Sky Emperor cover the dust, could this demon sword also be an Archean-famed sword? Yi Guchen was shocked after reading it. He immediately thought of the Archean sword token that he had obtained, which was engraved with the Archean Taotai pattern. A vague guess formed in his mind. However, Yi Guchen, who was deep in thought at this moment, did not notice it. After he entered this place, as the aura of life spread out, the tall figure sitting on the stone platform trembled slightly. Chapter 181. When I refined the sky-devouring beast's demon core, I accidentally obtained some vague memories. A mysterious man killed the primordial fierce beast Taotai, forged the primordial famous sword, and passed down the sky-devouring secret skill. Can the cause and effect of this really be linked together? Yi Guchen pondered. The sky-devouring secret skill that he possessed must be inextricably linked to the sky-devouring secret skill that he inherited from the primordial Taotai. And the primordial sword token that he obtained most likely had a lot to do with the primordial famous sword. In addition, there were many strange places in the infinite wasteland plane, which could not help but make all kinds of connections. When we entered the infinite wasteland plane, what exactly was that grand formation that vaguely perceived? Why did so many experts die in the infinite wasteland plane? Where did the deathly aura of the bottomless demon abyss come from? What exactly exists at the bottom of the demon abyss? That obscure power made me shudder. Yi Guchen frowned. There were too many points that puzzled him. He vaguely felt that he had grasped some clues, but he could not figure it out at the moment. Just as Yi Guchen was in a dilemma, a hair-raising sense of crisis suddenly seized his heart. Retreat. Almost subconsciously, Yi Guchen's body suddenly tilted as he executed wave-like subtle steps. Boom. A thick arm directly bombarded the mountain wall beside Yi Guchen. It easily pierced through the mountain wall, causing many cracks to appear around it. And the one who punched was the middle-aged man who had long been surrounded by deathly aura, and whose aura was like that of an ancient barbarian king. How can he still be alive? Yi Guchen was surprised and looked over. There was no trace of vitality on the middle-aged man's body. His pair of grayish-white eyes were filled with a thick deathly aura. The deathly aura has entered his body. Has this person turned into a living corpse or a puppet? Yi Guchen guessed. If that was the case, then it was reasonable for Yi Guchen to be attacked. After all, such an existence would instinctively attack living things with vitality. The corpses of the experts that Yi Guchen had seen before must have been killed by this man who had been corroded by the death aura. For a living corpse that could casually slaughter life and death entrances and spirit bridges, dealing with Yi Guchen would be as simple as crushing an ant. Let's go. Yi Guchen was about to retreat when he sensed the extreme danger. But what shocked him was that the body of the man who was tainted by the aura of death was not stiff in the slightest, and his speed was extraordinarily fast. He dashed in front of Yi Guchen and threw out a punch. The air was compressed to the extreme, and it was like an air cannon. Yi Guchen did not dare to be careless. He immediately activated his perfect body and activated his Vajra Dharma body. At the same time, his genuine chi surged out, forming a layer of guardian Vajra shadow on the surface of his body. It was the spirit-level defensive martial skill, Luo Tian's protection. With these 3 layers of protection, even a divine soul realm expert would find it difficult to heavily injure Yi Guchen in a short period of time. But Yi Guchen still felt his hair stand on end in the face of this punch. Boom. The living corpse's fist finally landed on the protective illusory figure condensed from true energy. Because the man had died long ago and was only controlled by the aura of death, this punch did not contain the slightest bit of genuine chi. It was just a pure fist of flesh. But when this punch landed, Yi Guchen's expression suddenly changed. With a bang, without any surprise, the fist directly pierced through the guardian Vajra Dharma body. Yi Guchen held his sword horizontally in front of his chest. The fist smashed down, directly bending the meteor soft sword. A terrifying force, like that of an ancient giant dragon, poured down on Yi Guchen's body. Puchi. Yi Guchen spat out a mouthful of blood. His arms made cracking sounds, and cracks spread out on his arm bones. At the same time, his sternum made cracking sounds, as if it was about to break. Then, with a bang, Yi Guchen's body smashed into the mountain wall, deeply sinking into it. Cracks spread out around him like a spider web. With just one punch, Yi Guchen, who had the perfect body and the Vajra Dharma body, was severely injured. At the same time, he had activated the guardian Vajra Dharma body. Strong. Too strong. This was Yi Guchen's thought at the moment. The man in front of him, who had died long ago, did not have the slightest bit of genuine chi. Just his body alone had such great power. It was simply terrifying. I heard that the 5 elements brute tribe pays attention to the cultivation of the body, but it is definitely not this terrifying. Who was this man when he was alive? Yi Guchen's chi and blood roared in his body. He tried his best to recover from his injuries. At the same time, he used wave-like subtle steps and flashed out. Because there was no time for him to rest. The living corpse punched again. Yi Guchen used the 64 hexagrams of the Book of Changes, and his body became blurry like smoke. The living corpse's speed and strength were extremely fast. Yi Guchen could only rely on this to deal with it. He did not dare to hold back. The Calamity Dust sword flashed out, and at the same time, a total of 3,000 green heaven-splitting sword souls surged out of his body. Kill. The heaven-splitting sword souls were not only powerful, but they could also penetrate into a person's body to cause damage. However, when these heaven-splitting sword souls continuously bombarded the living corpse, they burst out with metallic sparks. This body. Yi Guchen's tone was dignified. The strength of this living corpse's physical body was far beyond his expectations. And because it was a corpse, even if the heaven-splitting sword souls penetrated into its body, it would be useless. Void sword technique, 100 waves. Boundless heaven sword art, boundless wheel. Yi Guchen used both of his hands and performed the double sword divergence again. The 2 small unique skills of the spiritual level swordsmanship blasted out. Streams of sword waves accompanied by the incomparably sharp sword chi roulette fiercely bombarded the living corpse. However, accompanied by the explosion of smoke and dust, the living corpse was almost unscathed. He punched again. Yi Guchen's expression changed slightly. The ice and fire force on the surface of his body surged, and the cracked ice and fire dragon crystal armor covered his body again. At the same time, Yi Guchen crossed his two swords to block. The dragon elephant strength and Vajra body in his body were almost pushed to the extreme. Bang! However, the result was as expected. Yi Guchen's body was sent flying again. He spat out mouthfuls of blood, and was seriously injured. The ice and fire dragon crystal armor on the surface of his body seemed to be overwhelmed, and was covered with more cracks. Withdraw. Yi Guchen directly put away the ice and fire dragon crystal armor. This armor would definitely not be able to withstand the next punch. If that's the case. Yi Guchen's eyes gradually turned red. Vaguely, an incomparably powerful force seemed to be about to be stimulated. Yi Guchen was ready to risk his life, because if he did not use all his strength, he would not have a chance to attack. The living corpse rushed again and punched out. It seemed to be able to crush the immemorial mountain. Just as Yi Guchen was about to use the Thousand Deities Tribulation, an idea suddenly flashed in his mind. This living corpse is controlled by the Death Aura, and the Sword of Thunder Calamity can wear down the Death Aura. If I can activate a trace of the power of the Sword of Thunder Calamity, Yi Guchen suddenly thought. He could not control the Sword of Thunder Calamity at the moment, but he should be able to activate a trace of its power. Boom! The living corpse's fist swept out with a roar, and the air in front of it was compressed. Yi Guchen also drew his sword and pointed it at the living corpse's fist. At the same time, he used the hard and soft sword will to weaken the impact of the terrifying force. At the same time, Yi Guchen tried his best to communicate with the Sword of Thunder Calamity in his dantian. Using his body as a medium, he made contact with the death aura in the living corpse. In an instant, as if conducting electricity, the extremely dense death aura in the living corpse spread along the sword and toward Yi Guchen's arm. It began to corrode and contaminate it. Whoosh! As expected, the Sword of Thunder Calamity had a reaction. It burst out with dazzling lightning, and directly rushed from Yi Guchen's body to the living corpse. It destroyed all the death aura in it. The living corpse's body suddenly froze and didn't move. Chapter 182. Huff. Huff. Yi Guchen gasped for breath. Blood was still dripping from the corner of his mouth. As the power of lightning spread, the aura of death in the living corpse was completely dispersed. Although the corpse would definitely be corroded again, it wasn't something that could be healed in a short period of time. Yi Guchen withdrew his sword and directly sat on the ground. It was just a corpse that had been dead for who knew how long, but it brought him a fatal danger. This danger was 100 times more dangerous than when he was surrounded by Xia Yubing and the others. At least Yi Guchen was heavily injured by this corpse with 2 punches. Moreover, he had the perfect body, the Vajra physique, and many other trump cards. If it was an ordinary person, even if it was a prodigy of Xia Yubing's level, if they didn't have any protective measures, they would definitely be killed by 1 punch. The body of this 5 elements brute tribe's elite is really terrifying. Yi Guchen still had lingering fear. He previously thought that if he cultivated his body to the Vajra physique, he would have reached a kind of extreme. Now it seemed that there was always a higher mountain. Even if he cultivated the Vajra physique, it still wasn't the limit of the body's cultivation. In ancient times, there were those whose bodies became saints. Their physique was the most powerful divine weapon. Yi Guchen couldn't help but yearn for that realm. But now Yi Guchen didn't think so much. He activated his perfect body and consumed many spiritual medicines at the same time, starting to recover from his injuries. After about 2 hours, Yi Guchen finally managed to temporarily contain his injuries, and could move again. He approached the corpse. The aura of death in the surroundings was still gradually corroding it, but it shouldn't be a big problem for a short period of time. Yi Guchen immediately saw the round ancient jade hanging on the corpse's neck. This ancient jade was about half the size of a palm. On it were engravings of the azure dragon, white tiger, vermilion bird, black tortoise, and soaring snake. 5 elements, divine beasts. It seems that this person was indeed the strongest of the 5 elements brute tribe when he was alive. Yi Guqin took the ancient jade. The round ancient jade with the carvings of the 5 divine beasts was warm and smooth to the touch. But that was all. Yi Guqin did not notice anything else unusual. It was not a divine weapon with spiritual inscriptions, nor a spatial spiritual tool like a vital ring, nor something like a jade slip. It was just a simple piece of 5 divine beasts jade. Is it just a symbol of status? Yi Guqin was puzzled inside. He had gone through a life and death calamity, but in the end, he only obtained a piece of ancient jade of unknown use. His luck was really too bad. However, Yi Guqin still put this piece of 5 divine beasts ancient jade into his origin ring. Just as Yi Guqin was about to completely recover from his injuries and leave, his gaze suddenly focused on the corpse of the strongest berserker from the 5 elements berserker tribe. The arms, chest, and back of the corpse were engraved with vague images of divine beasts. However, upon closer inspection, it just so happened to match the 5 elements divine beast. Could it be? Yi Guqin thought, then directly pulled out the meteor soft sword and placed the sword blade on the dantian of the corpse. Although it seemed a little immoral to do so, Yi Guqin was not a person who would stick to such trifles. When the sword pierced down, Yi Guqin felt as if he was stabbing into basalt. He was once again amazed by the physical body of this berserker. Finally, after exerting a tremendous amount of effort, Yi Guqin managed to cut a small hole in the wall. Sure enough, at a glance, Yi Guqin saw the elixir that looked like a golden elixir hidden deep in the elixir field of the corpse. Yi Guqin took it out. This golden elixir was about the size of a longan, and there was a faint 5-colored light. There were also carvings of the 5 divine beasts on it, and at the same time, there were ant-like words all over it. It was impossible to see what they were. What is this? Yi Guqin was a little puzzled. Although this 5-colored golden elixir was shaped like an elixir, it seemed to be cast from metal. Moreover, if it was really an elixir, it should have been dissolved long ago after existing in this berserker's body for so long. It could not have been stored in the dantian all the time. Could it be some kind of spiritual weapon, but it doesn't look like one? Yi Guqin was confused. Although his knowledge was extensive, he still had no clue about some of the secrets of the 5 elements berserker tribe. Although I don't know what this 5-colored golden elixir is, I can feel the tempering power in it. Yi Guqin held the golden elixir in his hand, and could vaguely feel it. This 5-colored golden elixir definitely had the effect of tempering the body, and it was definitely related to the terrifying physical body of this berserker. When he thought of the terrifying physical strength of this berserker, Yi Guqin became curious about this 5-colored golden elixir. I'll keep it for now. I'll decide whether to use it in the future depending on the situation. Yi Guqin put away the 5-colored golden elixir. After thinking for a while, he used the meteor soft sword to dig a hole, and buried the corpse of this berserker inside. Although the 5 elements berserker tribe and the Saint Origin dynasty were opposing each other, Yi Guqin was not bound by good or evil. It was just that their standpoints were different. Although I don't know the effects of this 5 divine beasts ancient jade, and the 5-colored golden elixir for now, they are definitely not useless. At least I've gained something, Yi Guqin thought. In the next few days, Yi Guqin quietly sat cross-legged in the cave to recuperate from his injuries and recover his true qi. This was because he could not predict how long Xia Yubing and the others would wait for him. Therefore, Yi Guqin was not in a hurry and used this time to recuperate. At this moment, outside the bottomless devil abyss, Xia Yubing, Shin Miao, and Morong Ditian had already been waiting for a long time. He hasn't appeared for so many days. Looks like that Dugawu Bai has already died in the depths of the devil abyss, Morong Ditian said. At that depth, not to mention us Qi refinement realm experts, even divine soul realm experts, or even life and death chamber experts would not be able to last for such a long time. Although that brat's Qi Si is strange, there is no way he can survive, Shin Miao said. Xia Yubing frowned slightly. Although this should be the case according to common sense, she did not know why, but there was a faint feeling of unease in her heart. I'll go down and take a look. Xia Yubing's figure fluttered as she flew into the depths of the devil abyss. Of course, it was impossible for her to go to where Yi Guqian was, because the amount of her true qi was far inferior to Yi Guqian's. After carefully inspecting the area and discovering that there was no abnormal life aura, Xia Yubing once again returned to the surface. What? That Dugu Wu Bai can't possibly still be alive, right? Morong Ditian lightly smiled as he shook his head. And forget it. He should already be dead. We've already wasted too much time. In order to quickly obtain more caves, Yubing has a suggestion. Xia Yubing felt relieved and changed the topic. What suggestion? Shen Miao asked. Alliance. Xia Yubing faintly smiled. Her smile was cold and moving. Finally, after 6 days, Yi Guqian, who was meditating in the cave, received a message from Su Jianshi. After learning that Yi Guqian had escaped, Su Jianshi was extremely happy. She brought 2 pieces of news to Yi Guqian. One was that Xia Yubing, Morong Ditian, Shen Miao, and Prince Yuanyi had formed an alliance and were wantonly sweeping through the caves in the desolate plains. With their strength, they were already extremely powerful individually, let alone forming an alliance. Even the Zither Fairy of the Sky Jade Mansion, and Bai Yanji of the Mystic Spirit Mansion, had their caves snatched away by Xia Yubing's group. Although they were also the #1 heaven prides, they were clearly unable to contend against Xia Yubing's alliance. As for the second piece of news, it was rumored that light surged within the desolate plains, and divine splendor filled the sky. It seemed that an expert's cave had appeared. Moreover, it was not an ordinary expert's cave. Some people said that it was the cave of a divine dwelling expert. A cave dwelling of the divine dwelling stage? Yi Guqian raised his eyebrows. Chapter 183. The resources of a divine dwelling expert's cave dwelling were extremely tempting. After all, even among the 7 great forces, only the sect master, supreme elder and others were divine dwelling stage experts. If Yi Guqian could obtain a divine dwelling expert's cave dwelling, he would no longer have any scruples, and the 7 great forces would compete to invite him to join them. It seems that the divine dwelling expert's cave dwelling should be the final battlefield of the 4th stage of the elite gathering. Yi Guqian muttered to himself. It was easy to imagine that as news of the divine dwelling expert's cave dwelling spread, all the heaven prides participating in the Tianhuang Plains would flock there to compete for the greatest opportunity. It could be said that even 10 Spirit Bridge cave dwellings added together couldn't compare to a divine dwelling expert's cave dwelling. The reason why Xia Yubing was able to soar into the sky and grow from a talented genius to her current status was because of the North River Sword King's divine dwelling expert's cave dwelling. From this, one could see how abundant the divine dwelling expert's cave dwelling was. It would definitely attract everyone's attention. If I can get my hands on this cave, it will become my biggest bargaining chip. By then, joining the 7 forces will be a sure thing. I won't have to fear Qin Baijian and the other 2 powerhouses anymore. Yi Guqian's pitch-black eyes were filled with a strong desire to battle. And Xia Yubing, let's settle our grudge there. Yi Guqian's voice was as cold as ice. He sat cross-legged, healing his injuries. At the same time, the ice and fire dragon crystal armor covered his body, and the self-healing spirit runes glowed faintly. The cracks on the crystal armor were also slowly mending. 5 days later, Yi Guqian's injuries were completely healed, and he left the bottomless devil abyss. As for what was in the deepest part of the devil abyss, Yi Guqian wasn't qualified to explore it with his current strength. Although he had the lightning tribulation sword to protect him, and the death chi didn't harm him, he would only be courting death if he entered the deepest part. I'll explore the secrets of the devil abyss in the future. The most important thing now is the divine dwelling expert's cave dwelling. After leaving the bottomless demon abyss, Yi Guqian followed Su Jianshi's instructions and headed straight for the cave dwelling of the divine dwelling stage in the endless plains. The news of the divine dwelling stage cave dwelling had spread across the plains for many days, and it had attracted almost all the participating heaven prides. Even some bandits, unaffiliated cultivators, and others who wandered around the area all year round also headed in the direction of the divine dwelling stage cave dwelling. Everyone, this divine dwelling cave dwelling is our last opportunity. Several hundred miles away from the divine dwelling cave dwelling, four figures were rapidly moving. It was Xia Yubing and the other three. The one who spoke was Xia Yubing. Her eyes flickered with confidence that she would definitely win. But if we obtain a divine dwelling, how should we split it? Morong Ditian's voice was filled with deep meaning. Although the four of them had formed an alliance, it was only for temporary benefits and they had a common enemy. In their eyes, Yi Guchen was already dead, and all that was left was profit. No matter what, we should first obtain the cave dwelling and then decide how to split it. After all, the appearance of a divine dwelling stage cave dwelling will attract almost everyone. Xia Yubing was very smart. She didn't say it was a dead end and left some leeway. All right, we'll decide after we obtain the cave dwelling. Morong Ditian nodded. Hundreds of thoughts spun in the four's minds as they secretly made plans. In the other direction of the cave dwelling of the divine dwelling stage, there was also a figure moving alone. He was dressed in black, and his eyes were as black as ink. He gave off a dark and deathly stillness. It was Yuan Mia. Yuan Mia's voice was hoarse as he whispered, "I want the divine dwelling stage cave dwelling." He was like a lone wolf. He didn't cooperate with anyone, nor did he treat anyone as an ally or friend. At the same time, two other figures were also moving side by side in the direction of the divine dwelling stage cave dwelling. The two figures were a man and a woman. The woman was dressed in pink and had a peerless appearance. Her beautiful eyes were dazzling, making one's heart tremble. She was the #1 heaven pride of the Sky Jade Prefecture, Zither Fairy, whose beauty was on par with Situ Hongxue. The other young man was handsome and refined, giving off the gentle aura of a gentleman. He held a folding fan in his hand and had a tang sword at his waist. He was the #1 heaven pride of the Mystic Spirit Prefecture, Bai Yanji. However, the two of them didn't look very good at this moment. Their expressions were gloomy. Xia Yubing and the others are too much. The four of them are joining hands to snatch the cave dwelling. Zither Fairy's voice was filled with resentment, but she also felt somewhat powerless. The situation is stronger than the people. Apart from Prince Yuani, the other three can suppress us individually. There's nothing we can do. Bai Yanji shook his head. Although he and Zither Fairy were both the #1 heaven prides, they were at most average among the 10 great prefectures. They were stronger than Mo Lin and the others, but not by much. They could barely contend against Xia Yubing and the others, but they didn't have the power to counterattack. Hearing Bai Yanji's words, Zither Fairy held her forehead helplessly. It seems that the two of you are also Xia Yubing's victims. Right at this moment, a beautiful figure suddenly flashed over from afar, and she spoke. "You're Su Jianshi." Bai Yanji and Zither Fairy looked over. The girl opposite them was dressed in an azure dress. Her face was beautiful beyond compare, and her bright eyes flashed as she arrived in front of the two. "So it's Miss Su." Bai Yanji cupped his fists together. Zither Fairy's eyes were also filled with amazement when she saw Su Jianshi up close. Apart from Situ Hongxue and a few others, no one in the Saint Origin Empire could compare to her in terms of appearance. However, the pure and beautiful girl in front of her was even more charming than her. Of course, Zither Fairy had a gentle personality and naturally wouldn't fuss over this point. "I think Xia Yubing has snatched the cave dwelling from the two of you. Now that the cave dwelling of a divine dwelling expert has appeared, they will definitely attack again. At that time, if they join hands, you won't have a chance," said Su Jianshi. "So what does Miss Su mean?" Bai Yanji seemed to have thought of something. Su Jianshi clenched her fists and said, "That's right, we should also join forces to fight against them." "But Miss Su, it's not that we don't want to cooperate. Although Miss Su is talented and strong, compared to Xia Yubing and the others, you can at most contend against them. Moreover, they have the advantage in numbers, so we don't have much of a chance of winning," said Zither Fairy. "What if Dugu Wubai is added to the mix?" Su Jianshi blinked her bright eyes. "Dugu Wubai?" Bai Yanji and Zither Fairy looked at each other in surprise. Bai Yanji hesitantly said, "Miss Su, there have been rumors in the heavenly wasteland plains that Dugu Wubai was forced into the bottomless devil abyss by Xia Yubing and the others and died there." How could Duguwubai die so easily? He's still alive, so we have a chance of winning, said Su Jianshi confidently. Seeing Su Jianshi's determined and confident expression, Bai Yanji and Zitherfairy were puzzled. Zitherfairy's eyes wandered as she said, "If Duguwubai is really still alive, then I will join. Speaking of which, I may owe Duguwubai a favor." "Oh, what favor?" Su Jianshi was curious. "I have a personal grudge with Ji Hongmei from the Qing State Prefecture. Duguwubai killed Ji Hongmei, which can be considered as solving my problem," said Zitherfairy. "Since that's the case, it couldn't be better. Let's go to the Divine Dwelling cave dwelling first." Su Jianshi was full of fighting spirit now that she had found an ally. Bai Yanji helplessly shook his head and followed. Chapter 184. As time passed, more and more people rushed to the location of the Divine Dwelling Stage's cave dwelling. Not far from the Divine Dwelling Stage's cave dwelling, a figure shrouded in a gray cloak was slowly moving towards the cave dwelling. "Murong Ditian, you will definitely appear here. This time, I want you dead." The gray-robed person's voice was like a clear spring, but it was mixed with bone-chilling hatred. It seemed as if the air around the gray-robed man had become distorted. Then, a cold and frightening aura slowly spread out from his body. She didn't come to the gathering for fame or status but for revenge. The heavenly wasteland plains was filled with danger. Generally speaking, very few people would venture deep because if they were careless and entered a dangerous place, they might never be able to come out. But recently, there was an ancient stone forest in the heavenly wasteland plains that exuded a divine splendor. There were faint fluctuations of a powerful formation that trembled in the void. However, as time passed, the fluctuations of the ceiling formation grew weaker and weaker. The area outside the ancient stone forest that was emitting divine splendor was already filled with people. Participating heaven prides, unaffiliated cultivators, bandits, and all kinds of people had gathered here, evidently waiting for the expert's cave dwelling to appear. Not far away, 3 figures flashed over like rainbows. Light scattered, revealing the figures of 2 women and 1 man. It was Su Jianshi and the other 2. That's the top heaven prides of the Mystical Spirit Mansion and Heavenly Jade Mansion, and Su Jianshi. Many participating heaven prides recognized Su Jianshi and the others and exclaimed in surprise. Su Jianshi and the other 2 had come together, which explained a lot. Seeing that the 3 of them came together, could they have formed an alliance? The purpose of their alliance is obviously to compete with Xia Yubing's alliance. Many heaven prides understood. Although Su Jianshi is strong, Xia Yubing and the others aren't to be trifled with. Some heaven prides couldn't stand the actions of Xia Yubing and the others. Although the law of the jungle was the law of the jungle, the alliance of 4 heaven prides was a devastating disaster for weaker heaven prides like them. In the end, they might not even be able to obtain a cave dwelling. As for the Divine Dwelling Stage cave dwelling, these heaven prides had no intention of obtaining it. Their goal was the same as the bandits and unaffiliated cultivators. They only wanted to enter and obtain some opportunities. As for the true owners of the cave abodes, they only belonged to the top geniuses. Su Jianshi pondered for a moment and said, "Based on the fluctuations of the formation here, it should disperse completely in a day or 2. At that time, I presume everyone will charge in to seize the fortuitous encounters." As for the fight for ownership of the cave abode, it will definitely be left until after they leave the cave abode. Bai Yanji and Zitherfairy also nodded slightly, but their expressions changed slightly. "Are you worried about Duguwubai? He will definitely come. Don't worry." Su Jianshi smiled when she saw the change in their expressions. After about 2 hours, more and more people gathered here. In the distance, 4 rays of light flew over. They faintly emitted powerful fluctuations that caused many people to raise their eyebrows. The surrounding crowd held their breaths when the 4 figures came to a stop. It was Xia Yubing and the other 3. Xia Yubing and the others immediately noticed Su Jianshi's group. "Heh, are the weak beginning to gather together?" The manic blade Shinta Miao's aura was extremely ferocious. He looked disdainfully at Bai Yanji and the other defeated opponents. "You're just a mantis trying to stop a chariot. Prince Yuani's tone was indifferent. One of his arms was still injured and had yet to recover. Hasn't Dugu Wubai taught you enough of a lesson? Su Jianshi crossed her arms in front of her chest and cast a sidelong glance at Prince Yuani. Prince Yuani's face suddenly darkened. What's the point of talking about a dead man? Hearing Prince Yuani's words, the surrounding crowd shook their heads. They had also heard the news that Dugu Wubai had died in the bottomless devil abyss. Although they didn't believe it at first, the news was confirmed as Xia Yubing and the others spread. You're thinking too much. Su Jianshi pursed her lips with a relaxed expression. Heh, do you think the dead can come back to life? If he's alive, why wouldn't he come here? I'll wait here. Prince Yuani sneered, evidently finding it ridiculous. Xia Yubing, however, frowned slightly. She had a bad premonition as she looked at Su Jianshi's relaxed expression. Let's not give them a chance. Let's attack now and defeat these 3 small fries. There will be less interference when we fight for the cave dwelling. Prince Yuani raised his chin proudly. Brother Shintu, let's attack. The 2 of us should be enough. Murong Ditian stepped forward with a faint smile. There's no need for you. Yubing alone can defeat the 3 of them. Xia Yubing stepped forward, her tone as calm as water as if she was saying the most ordinary thing. However, the people standing opposite Xia Yubing weren't ordinary heaven prides, but 2 number 1 heaven prides and Su Jianshi, who wasn't any weaker than the number 1 heaven prides. Only Xia Yubing, who had obtained the inheritance of the divine dwelling stage cave dwelling, had the qualifications to say such words. TSK, as expected of a heaven prides. We can only look at a phoenix like Xia Yubing from afar. Some heaven prides sighed. Xia Yubing, aren't you afraid of biting your tongue when you talk big? Su Jianshi shouted, extremely unconvinced. Oh, is that so? It's a pity that Yubing never talks big. I only know how to speak the truth. Xia Yubing's icy blue eyes suddenly flashed with a cold light. Her feet shifted, and her figure flashed like a gust of cold wind, directly arriving in front of Su Jianshi and the others. Be careful. Zither Fairy and Bai Yinji shouted. They didn't expect Xia Yubing to attack so decisively. Zither Fairy's arm flashed, and an ancient zither floated in the air. Spirit runes flashed on the zither's body. Her slender fingers plucked the zither strings, and her true chi surged. Zither music turned into destructive sound waves that spread out. Bai Yinji put away his folding fan and unsheathed his tang saber. Cold light flashed, and a powerful saber chi swept towards Xia Yubing. You overestimate yourself. Xia Yubing didn't even take out her glacier sword. With a flick of her finger, she activated a sliver of ice sword intent. It turned into rays of cold light that destroyed the sound waves and saber chi. Then she flickered and pointed at Su Jianshi. You'll regret underestimating me. Su Jianshi took out her green cicada sword and used her phoenix spirit sword art. Thousands of strands of sword chi spun and spread out. Su Jianshi's attack shocked many heavens prides. Condense. However, Xia Yubing only muttered in the face of this sword art. Cold air surged around her, and as it spread out, it seemed to want to freeze the sword chi. Her finger turned into a palm of chi that was about to slap Su Jianshi's face. Clearly, Xia Yubing wanted to teach Su Jianshi a lesson. This slap will teach you what humility is. Xia Yubing's tone was very cold. She was like an ice goddess looking down on Su Jianshi. Not good. Su Jianshi's expression changed slightly. Xia Yubing's strength had exceeded her expectations. Right at this time, Xia Yubing suddenly felt a type of extreme threat. Not far away, a terrifying river of blood that seemed to be formed by sword chi swept across the sky and surged towards Xia Yubing. The ripples caused many heavens pride's eyes to twitch. This sword will also teach you what it means to be a frog in a well that can't talk about the sea, and a summer insect that can't talk about the ice. A figure with a sword in his hand arrived. His eyes were cold and indifferent. It was Yi Guchen. Chapter 185. When Yi Guchen's black-robed figure appeared, all of the sand in the air seemed to have stopped. The whistling sand seemed to have stopped for a moment. Boom. Xia Yubing drew her sword and activated a trace of ice sword intent. Her sword chi transformed into a river of glaciers, and collided with the third move of the god-slaying sword art, Yellow Springs. Because it was a sudden attack, even with Xia Yubing's strength, she still suffered a loss. She retreated dozens of steps and looked at the slowly approaching figure with a grave expression. All the spectators had the same expression on their faces. First there was a trace of doubt, then shock, and finally they froze. It was no wonder their expressions were so interesting. News had already spread that Dugu Wubai had fallen in the bottomless devil abyss. The news came from Prince Yuani, so it was somewhat true. Later on, Xia Yubing and the others confirmed it. It was enough to confirm that Dugu Wubai had already fallen. But if Dugu Wubai had already fallen in the bottomless devil abyss, then who was this youth in front of them? When Prince Yuani saw Yi Guchen's arrival, he also looked as if he had seen a ghost. The sneer from before still remained on his face. He had said that he would wait for Yi Guchen's arrival. He hadn't expected that Yi Guchen would really come. 4 heavens prides took action at the same time, and forced me to fight alone. After you succeeded, you actually wantonly announced it. You're truly shameless. Now you're bullying Su Jianshi. Aren't you going too far? Although Yi Guchen's tone was indifferent, the coldness in his words caused everyone's heart to turn cold. At this point, how could they not understand that Yi Guchen had used some unknown method to escape the bottomless devil abyss? That's the bottomless devil abyss. This Dugu Wubai actually managed to escape. Just how many methods does he have? Dugu Wubai seemed to have appeared out of thin air like a blazing sun. He's truly mysterious. His identity is unfathomable. A few heavens prides discussed. They had previously believed that Xia Yubing should be an existence that could suppress this generation's geniuses. But now Yi Guchen was actually able to survive after being surrounded by Xia Yubing and the other 3 and forced into the bottomless devil abyss. Such ability caused many geniuses to be extremely convinced. Surprisingly, Song Daojin, Chu Shiqing, and the others were amongst the crowd as well, and they revealed expressions of joy when they saw Yi Guchen. After all, Yi Guchen had saved them before. However, with their current strength, they were clearly of no use to the current situation. Instead, they might even become a burden. Thus, Song Daojin and the others didn't choose to interfere. You really didn't die. Xia Yubing's eyes shone with a strange light. She stared at Yi Guchen as if she wanted to see through him. She always had a strange feeling about this ordinary-looking young man in front of her. Of course, this strange feeling wasn't because of her feelings for him, but because she always paid special attention to this young man. Just like before, Xia Yubing always felt that Yi Guchen wouldn't die so easily. But now he really did appear in front of her. Apart from Xia Yubing, Shen Miao and Murong Ditian were also somewhat unable to accept this. After all, they had personally forced Yi Guchen into the devil abyss. Not only that, but they had also guarded it for so many days. They were truly unable to believe that a mere Qi refinement realm cultivator could survive in a forbidden land like the bottomless devil abyss for so long without dying. This simply defied common sense. As for the one who found it the most unbelievable and also unable to accept it, it was naturally Prince Yuani. The injury on his arm was caused by Yi Guchen, and it still hadn't healed. Although he didn't show it on the surface, he was already extremely fearful of Yi Guchen in his heart, as well as fear. With Yi Guchen's arrival, the entire situation changed in an instant. Without Yi Guchen, even with Su Jianshi, it would be very difficult for them to contend against Xia Yubing and the others. But now, Yi Guchen had forced Xia Yubing to retreat with a single move. Coupled with his shocking battle record of killing Qi Naoshi, everyone had to admit that Yi Guchen was indeed an extremely heavy weight. However, the happiest people were none other than Zither Fairy and Bai Yanji. Previously, Xia Yubing and the others had snatched their cave abodes, and they had long been stifled in their hearts. Now that they saw Yi Guchen force Xia Yubing to retreat with a single move, they felt extremely carefree in their hearts. Especially Zither Fairy, who looked at Yi Guchen with a pair of beautiful eyes that were like autumn waters. Although Yi Guchen's appearance was ordinary after disguising himself, his bearing was extraordinary. Zither Fairy was used to seeing handsome young masters fawning over her. Now that she saw the ordinary Yi Guchen, she had a different feeling. She moved gracefully and arrived before Yi Guchen, bringing along a fragrant wind. I thank young Master Dugu for killing Ji Hongmei and removing a thorn in my heart. Zither Fairy smiled sweetly and looked at Yi Guqin. Her eyes were like the ripples of spring water. It was very moving. To the side, Bai Yanji was stupefied. He had never seen Zither Fairy use such a humble tone as a little girl. Even though she was gentle, she was still the #1 prodigy. Ordinary people wouldn't be treated so modestly by her. However, thinking that the other party was Duguwu Bai Yanji could only shake his head with a wry smile. Cough cough, now isn't the time to say such things. At this moment, an azure figure rudely cut in between Yi Guqin and Zither Fairy. Su Jianshir's face was a bit red, seemingly a bit embarrassed. She turned her back to Zither Fairy and looked up at Yi Guqin. She puffed up her cheeks and said, I didn't form an alliance for you to talk about such things. After Su Jianshir finished speaking, she seemed to have a guilty conscience and avoided his gaze. I was being rude. Zither Fairy gave Su Jianshir a meaningful glance before tactfully retreating. This made Su Jianshir's face turn even redder, like the sunset clouds. It's a pity that young Master Dugu already belongs to someone, Zither Fairy said in her heart with some regret. Only Yi Guqin looked at Su Jianshir in confusion. He didn't understand that this expression on a girl's face was called jealousy. However, at this moment, Yi Guqin suddenly felt that there was a dangerous aura flashing behind him. He slowly turned around and saw Xia Yubing holding the glacier sword. She seemed to want to attack. Do you want to fight to the death now? Yi Guqin held the meteor soft sword in his hand, his tone sharp. If he fought with Xia Yubing now and exposed his identity, it wouldn't benefit him in the fight for the cave dwelling. Instead, it would make it easier for others to find out about him. However, if Xia Yubing insisted on forcing him, Yi Guqin naturally wouldn't avoid the battle. He would fight when the time came. The confrontation between Xia Yubing and Yi Guqin made the surrounding geniuses, rogue cultivators, and bandits hold their breaths. Was the real battle about to begin now? Su Jianshir and the others also stood out and faced Shinta Miao, Morong Ditian, and the others. The smell of gunpowder was very strong. Just as the battle was about to break out, a pitch-black figure rushed over from the distance. It was Yuan Mia. Yuan Mia is here. He's the second strongest person on the Heaven's Pride ranking, second only to the legendary Jun Xiaoyao. Yuan Mia's arrival also caused an uproar. Prince Yuani's expression suddenly changed. Yuan Mia had previously used his sword to help Yi Guqin escape. Although it was for his own benefit, there was no guarantee that Yuan Mia wouldn't attack again. If the two factions fight until both sides suffer, then the one who benefits in the end will only be origin annihilation. Xia Yubing's thoughts were meticulous, and she immediately thought of this. She withdrew her dangerous killing intent, and her temperament immediately became as calm as a virgin's. Duguwu Bai, I'll let you stay in this world for a while longer. Xia Yubing sheathed her sword. I'll return those words to you. Yi Guqin also sheathed his sword. Chapter 186. The conflict that was about to break out was temporarily stopped because of Yuan Mia's arrival. Whether it was Xia Yubing or Yi Guqin, they didn't want to fight and let Yuan Mia take advantage of the situation. Although Yuan Mia had helped him before, Yi Guqin knew that Yuan Mia didn't help him out of kindness. Coupled with the rumors he had heard before, Yi Guqin knew that Yuan Mia just wanted to create more trouble for Prince Yuani. In other words, Yuan Mia wanted to use Yi Guqin as a tool. Even so, Yuan Mia had helped him once. Yi Guqin nodded at Yuan Mia. Yuan Mia didn't have any reaction, but his single eye that was as still as the night took a deep look at Yi Guqin. Yi Guqin felt a faint threat. Yuan Mia, who possessed darkness sword intent, absolutely couldn't be underestimated. But fortunately, there wasn't any conflict between him and Yuan Mia for the time being, and they even had a common enemy. After Yuan Mia's arrival, the whole atmosphere once again fell into a suffocating solemnity. But a delicate balance was maintained, and no one dared to casually act again. They waited like this for a full day. A day later, in the ancient stone forest, the gradually weakening ceiling formation finally couldn't withstand the erosion of time, and it collapsed with a loud crash accompanied by the sound of glass shattering. And the moment the ceiling formation collapsed, An extremely powerful wave of energy swept out like a volcanic eruption. That wave of energy was far more powerful than that of an ordinary expert's cave dwelling, causing the ground to tremble and wind and sand to sweep across the world. This is... Yi Guchen's face was filled with shock. The scene of fighting for the North River Sword King's cave dwelling still remained in his mind. At that time, when the Sword King mystic realm appeared, although the fluctuations were extremely intense, it seemed to be weaker than the fluctuations of this cave abode. The North River Sword King is an expert of the divine dwelling stage, and the undulations emitted from this cave dwelling are even stronger than the Sword King's. Could it be? Yi Guchen came to an extremely shocking conclusion. None of the Sky Prides who could persevere till now were pushovers. Naturally, they weren't fools. They knew that the aura of this cave was way too strong. Could it be the abode of an honorable from the heavenly palace? One of the heaven's favorites asked hoarsely. His eyes were filled with shock. At the divine dwelling stage, a divine dwelling had been established in one's chi-si. One could move unhindered in the South Horizon region, and was also known as a king realm expert. For example, the North River Sword King was an expert of the divine dwelling stage, so he could be called a king. As for the heavenly palace realm, one sea of consciousness could forge a heavenly palace. Even in the entire South Horizon region, they were ranked at the peak and were also known as venerables. It was no wonder that these heaven prides were shocked. In a place like the Saint Origin Empire, the king of the divine dwelling stage was already an unattainable peak. As for the more powerful venerables of the heaven palace realm, they had almost never appeared. Is it really the abode of venerables of the heavenly palace realm? Yi Guchen looked around. Whether it was the participating heaven prides, bandits or unaffiliated cultivators, everyone's eyes were blazing with desire. Their red eyes were like hungry wolves. A divine dwelling stage abode had created a heaven prideful girl like Xia Yubing. How valuable would the abode of venerables of the heavenly palace be? Almost everyone's eyes were red, and their hearts were filled with excitement. Only Yi Guchen's black eyes remained as calm as an ancient well. The abode of a divine dwelling stage expert was already extremely dangerous. How could the abode of venerables be so simple? Just as the ceiling array formation of the Venerable One's cave abode collapsed, the 7 major forces and many spectators outside the infinite planes, who had been watching through the 10,000 miles sky survey mirror, also sensed the vast waves coming from the planes. This wave of energy is... The higher-ups of the 7 great forces couldn't sit still any longer. The divine dwelling stage, no, it's a stage even more vast than the divine dwelling stage. Could it be the abode of venerables of the heavenly palace? Xiantai of the limitless sword sect was shaken. He could no longer sit still, and he rose to his feet and soared into the air. Let's go. Feng Manlu slowly rose to his feet from the sword sect's tower. Although he was blind, his spiritual sense was extremely sharp. He directly led the group of people from the sword sect's tower forest and flew away. Immediately afterwards, the 3 imperial palaces, the 9 profound sect, the sealed saber royal hall, the rhinoceros divine palace and the other forces also hurriedly left. As the people of the 7 great forces left, some spectators could no longer sit still. Among the spectators, there was no lack of experts at the life and death threshold and world spirit bridge stage. Soon after, the news of the Venerable's cave dwelling's appearance also spread among the crowd, setting off an uproar. A Venerable's cave dwelling has appeared. There will be a good show to watch this time. If any heaven prides can obtain a Venerable's cave dwelling, the 7 great forces will most likely fight over it. Let's go and take a look. This is definitely the final battle between heaven prides of the elite gathering. Rumble. There were tens of thousands of spectators, and they all rushed towards the Venerable's cave dwelling's appearance. From afar, it looked like a black tide was surging like ants, and the scene was rather spectacular. Qin Baijian and the other 2, who had a grudge against Yi Guchen, also flew into the air. In the middle of the crowd, Shui, who was being squeezed back and forth, also staggered as she followed the crowd. It could be said that the appearance of a Venerable's cave dwelling had affected everyone's hearts. At that moment, in the infinite plains, outside the ancient stone forest, although the ceiling formation had already collapsed. What was rare was that no one stepped into it first. Even though everyone present was breathing heavily and their eyes were red, no one dared to act rashly. How could a venerable's cave dwelling be so easy to investigate? If they were not careful, they might lose their lives inside. It was also because of this that the scene fell into a strange silence. In this silence, everyone suddenly felt that the ground beneath their feet seemed to be trembling. Did we trigger some formation mechanism? Some heaven prides asked suspiciously. No. Some people turned their heads and saw the figures rushing over in the sky, as well as the crowd on the ground surging over like a tide of ants. It's the 7 great forces and the spectators outside. This aura is stronger than the divine dwelling stage. It's indeed a venerable's cave dwelling. Xiantai stood in the air, his cold eyes, which had always been dignified, unable to conceal the fire in them at this moment. A venerable's cave dwelling was an irresistible temptation for any force. If it weren't for the fact that the 10 prefectures' elite gathering was still ongoing and they couldn't break the rules, Xiantai would have directly sent a message to the Limitless Sword sect to occupy the venerable's cave dwelling. I am the master of the Limitless Sword sect's Sun Moon Hall, Xiantai. If anyone can obtain this venerable's cave dwelling, the doors of the Sun Moon Hall will be open to them, and they will receive the same resources and treatment as Xian Hao. Xiantai's hands were clasped behind his back as his loud voice spread in all directions. His words made the eyes of many participating heaven prides turn red with envy. Not only would they be able to directly enter the Sun Moon Hall, but they would also receive the same treatment as Xian Hao. Xian Hao was a sword Dao genius that the Limitless Sword sect had poured all their resources into, and his status was extraordinary. The heaven prides that obtain the venerable's cave dwelling will receive guidance from the hall master of the titled Saber King Hall, and all the resources will be open to them, said an upper echelon of the titled Saber King Hall. The same goes for the consonant's divine palace. The upper echelons of the various great forces all spoke up. It was obvious that they were determined to obtain the venerable's cave dwelling. Due to the rules set by the 7 great forces, they couldn't fight for the cave dwelling. They could only pay the price to rope in the heaven prides that obtained the cave dwelling. Among the great forces, only Feng Manlu of the Sword Sect's Tower Forest didn't speak up. Elder Qing He, Chu Qingqi and the others were somewhat anxious as they looked at Feng Manlu. But Feng Manlu acted as if he hadn't heard anything. He didn't speak, nor did he make any tempting promises. Chapter 187. Although Feng Manlu didn't say anything, the promises of the other 6 factions were enough to ignite the flames in the hearts of the participating prodigies. Finally, someone couldn't hold back the greed and desire in his heart, and directly flew into the ancient stone forest. This action seemed to have set off a chain reaction. In just a few breaths of time, figures rushed into the stone forest like locusts. Let's go too, Yi Guchen said. His tone was neither hurried nor slow. Then Yi Guchen, Su Jianshi, and the others directly entered. On the other side, Xia Yubing Yuan Mia, and the gray-robed man, Hong Qinxue, also entered. In addition, even Song Daozhen, Chu Shiqing, and the others had persevered until now and also entered the stone forest. The 7 factions didn't say anything about these people who wanted to enter the Venerable One's cave abode, although they were determined to obtain the Venerable One's cave abode. The resources inside were clearly not something that the Qi refinement realm cultivators could snatch away. Therefore, the 7 factions didn't care about letting them enter first to obtain the opportunities. After all, when they came out, the prodigies would still decide who would obtain the cave abode. The person who would belong to the cave abode was the one they were fighting for. As soon as Yi Guchen entered the stone forest, he felt that this place was unusual. From the outside, it looked like an ancient stone forest that had been weathered by the wind. However, as soon as Yi Guchen and the others entered, they saw that the surrounding fog was thick and obstructing their vision. The stone pillars that stood tall had faint formation runes flowing on them. They weren't ceiling formation runes, nor were they offensive formations. Is this a maze formation? Yi Guchen's tone was solemn. Although a maze formation didn't have any offensive power, it was more terrifying than an offensive formation in many cases. Not only did a maze formation confuse the mind, but it could also wear down a person's willpower. If one's willpower wasn't strong enough, they might go crazy in a few days and become a headless fly. Yi Guqin had the 6th Dao Ashura sword formation, and had some understanding of formations. Although he hadn't reached the Grandmaster realm, he could still inspect it. Just as Yi Guqin was about to inspect the formation, Zither Fairy spoke up. "Young Master Dugu, leave it to me." "Zither Fairy, do you have a way to break this maze formation?" Yi Guqin asked. "We can try." Zither Fairy pursed her lips and smiled, once again summoning her zither. Her slender fingers plucked the zither strings, and the zither music flowed out like a clear spring. It didn't have the lethality of the previous battle. Instead, it was incomparably pleasant to the ear. Yi Guqin would have liked to sit down quietly and listen to the sound of the zither, if it were not for the fact that it was not the right time. Seeing Yi Guqin's gaze, Zither Fairy. Zither Fairy's Zither Fairy. She was known as Zither Fairy. If she couldn't conquer others with her zither music, then she wouldn't be able to live up to her reputation. "If young Master Dugu likes my zither music, I can play for you every day." Zither Fairy's eyes twinkled. Yi Guqin was about to speak when Su Jianshi said with a sour tone, "Sure enough, a beauty who knows how to play the zither is very attractive. Don't you think so, silly boy?" "Well, I don't know music. I'm afraid I'll be letting you down." Yi Guqin shook his head with a wry smile. Zither Fairy pursed her lips and didn't say anything. As the zither music spread out, the layout of the surrounding terrain was also under her control. Zither Fairy said, "I know the general route. Let's go to the center of the stone forest." She didn't use her eyes to determine the direction, but the feedback from the zither. The maze formation could confuse the eyes, but it couldn't confuse the ears. With Zither Fairy guiding the way, Yi Guqin's group sped up. But not long after, there was a sudden scream not far away. "Everyone be careful." Yi Guqin took out his meteor soft sword. Su Jianshi and Bai Yanji stood guard on the left and right while Zither Fairy led the way in the center. But as they went deeper, the screams became more intense. Whoosh! A black shadow suddenly shot out from the side, heading in Bai Yanji's direction. "What's that?" Bai Yanji was slightly taken aback, and casually sent out a palm strike. A palm strike landed on the black shadow, but to everyone's surprise, the black shadow directly pierced through the true chi and headed straight for Bai Yanji's face. Whoosh! A blood-red sword ray slashed across and sliced the black shadow in half. Yi Guqin's group looked carefully, and found that it was a pitch-black worm with a sharp mouth. "This is a spirit-sucking worm," Yi Guqin's group said with a serious tone. Spirit-sucking worms had a special ability to be immune to true chi. After entering a person's body, they would directly enter the chi sea to absorb true chi, until the chi sea dried up. In a way, they were similar to blood-sucking worms, except that they absorbed true chi. Ordinary spirit-sucking worms were only rank 2 demonic beasts and could be easily killed. But the danger of spirit-sucking worms was that they didn't move alone, but in groups. One could imagine how terrifying it would be to be surrounded by a large group of spirit-sucking worms that were immune to true chi attacks. "Let's go quickly. There must be many spirit-sucking worms in this ancient stone forest." Yi Guqin's group looked at each other and ran quickly. But the death of one spirit-sucking worm would attract a large group of spirit-sucking worms. Along with the buzzing sounds, a large group of spirit-sucking worms surrounded them like an ant tide. "Kill." Yi Guqin slowly raised his hand and the heavenly sun Xianming fire burst out. The flames alternated between extreme heat and cold, forming a fire tide that collided with the swarm of spirit-sucking worms. Countless hissing sounds could be heard as the swarm of spirit-sucking worms was burned into pitch-black powder. Heaven and earth flame. Zither Fairy and the others were delighted to see this. Heaven and earth flame had a restraining effect on all kinds of snakes and insects. So this swarm of spirit-sucking worms, which others would avoid like tigers and wolves, was not much of a threat to Yi Guqin. Yi Guqin used the heavenly sun Xianming fire to form a flame shield that enveloped Su Jianshi, Zither Fairy, and Bai Yanji. As the flames spread, the surrounding spirit-sucking worms retreated in fear. Not long after, Yi Guchen's group rushed through the swarm of spirit-sucking worms and reached the center of the stone forest. Yi Guchen dispersed the flaming air shield and glanced at the surroundings. Compared to the large group of people who had entered the ancient stone forest, only 10 or 20% of them could solve the maze and break through the swarm of spirit-sucking worms. Many of them were injured. That should be the entrance to the cave. Yi Guchen looked over. In the center of the stone forest, 9 stone pillars were arranged in a circle, forming array patterns on the ground. The center was as dark as a hole. Looking at the Venerable One's cave, it should also be underground. Let's go. Yi Guchen waved his hand without hesitation. Chapter 188. As they rushed down the pitch-black cave, Yi Guchen and the others could clearly feel the pressure that belonged to the Venerable One. A Sky Palace Venerable. Even after death, his aura was still shocking. This underground cave was surrounded by fluorescent lights. The surrounding cave walls were inlaid with naturally glowing ores, illuminating the interior of the cave. There are fluctuations of a battle ahead. Yi Guchen and the others felt the fluctuations of true qi coming from ahead. They all rushed over. After a while, Yi Guchen saw it. Spiritual qi was surging in front of them. It was an underground fertile land with many spiritual herbs growing there. Many experts were fighting over them. It's an herb field. Zither Fairy's beautiful eyes flashed. Although this herb field isn't big, the soil is the rare spiritual crystal soil. This soil is most suitable for spiritual herbs to grow. Bai Yinji's eyes also flashed with a strange light. Spiritual crystal soil was expensive, but it filled up an entire herb field. It was obvious that the Sky Palace Venerable was very generous. There are treasured herbs. Su Jianshi pointed. Treasured herbs were rarer than spiritual herbs. Naturally, their value was higher. Moreover, treasured herbs that grew in spiritual crystal soil would have purer and more vigorous medicinal effects. Without hesitation, Yi Guchen and the others immediately started to fight. No one would complain about having too many treasured herbs. When the warriors fighting for treasured herbs saw Yi Guchen and the others arrive, their expressions changed. They retreated a little, not daring to compete with them. Not long after, Yi Guchen obtained a few treasured herbs. His gaze once again turned to another part of the herb field. He found a fruit that looked like a baby. It emitted a faint soul fluctuation. It's the infant soul fruit. Yi Guchen's eyes flashed. The infant soul fruit was not only a supreme-grade treasured herb, but it was also a rare treasured herb that greatly benefited soul power. This treasured herb that nourished soul power would be of great help in breaking through to the divine soul realm. Yi Guchen did not hesitate. He moved his feet and reached out to grab the infant soul fruit. At this moment, a sharp sword aura suddenly tore through the air. Yi Guchen raised his eyebrows slightly. He gently raised his hand and true energy gushed out from his fingertips. A 6-pulsed divine sword aura shot out and collided with the sword aura. He turned his head and saw that it was Xia Yubing and the others. As for the person who had unleashed the sword, it was Murong Ditian. As expected, enemies are bound to meet on a narrow road. Su Jianshi and the others were on high alert. Xia Yubing's beautiful eyes swept over the infant soul fruit, but she did not reveal much interest. Obviously she, who possessed the inheritance of the North River Sword King, did not lack treasures like the infant soul fruit that could nourish her soul force. However, to others, especially those geniuses who were at the 9th refinement stage, and were about to break through to the divine soul stage, the infant soul fruit was extremely attractive. I want this infant soul fruit. Murong Ditian spoke. They seemed to have reached some sort of agreement. Prince Yuani and Shinta Miao did not say anything. That will depend on whether you have the qualifications. Yi Guchen held the meteor soft sword in his hand, his gaze sharp. Duga Wubai, although you are strong, you are not undefeatable. Even when facing Yi Guchen, Murong Ditian was still confident. Great splashing wind sword, wind god's howl. Murong Ditian's long sword, which was covered in bandages, suddenly appeared. Although it was not unsealed, there was still a sharp sword aura gushing out. The valiant sword aura was like a tornado as it swept towards Yi Guchen. Bring out your true abilities. If you use such probing methods, it is meaningless. Yi Guchen swung his sword. The meteor sword's edge flickered with a blood-like radiance. A blood slaughter shot out and destroyed Morong Ditian's attack. To deal with you, I really need to use my true abilities. Morong Ditian laughed. He slowly raised his hand and bit his finger. After that, he slowly smeared the blood on the long sword that was covered in bandages. Yi Guchen's gaze turned serious. Morong Ditian's sword always gave him an indescribable sense of danger. Scour Luo sword unseal. Morong Ditian shouted coldly. The bandages that were stained with blood flowed with blood-colored runes. After that, the bandages suddenly opened, revealing an ancient sword. This ancient sword's body was mottled. It was dark red in color, as if it had once drunk human blood. Spiritual runes were engraved on it. Vaguely, there seemed to be some sort of connection. Could this be? Yi Guchen looked at the ancient sword. He could vaguely feel an extremely sharp sword aura. This is my Morong family's ancestral hall's divine weapon with mystical runes. In the end, only I received their recognition and obtained this Scour Luo sword. Although it no longer has the might of a divine weapon with mystical runes, it is still considered a top-grade divine weapon with mystical runes. Being able to die under the Scour Luo sword is your fortune. Morong Ditian said proudly. Top-grade divine weapon with mystical runes. The surrounding crowd looked at Morong Ditian and exclaimed in shock. One must know that Prince Yuani relied on his high-grade divine weapon with mystical runes, the heavenly sacred five-element wheel, to squeeze into the ranks of the prodigies. Not to mention that Morong Ditian was originally a prodigy with decent strength. With the addition of his top-grade divine weapon with mystical runes, he was like a tiger that had grown wings. Top-grade divine weapon with mystical runes? This is interesting. Yi Guchen didn't have any fear. Instead, he was a little interested. Originally, I wanted to wait for Yi Guchen to arrive before unsealing the Scour Luo sword and killing him. However, it's a pity that he was a coward. Therefore, I can only let you suffer. Morong Ditian said coldly. He hated Yi Guchen to the bone. Originally, he wanted to unseal the Scour Luo sword and kill him. However, he discovered that he didn't arrive. Of course, this was what Morong Ditian didn't know. The Dugu Wubai in front of him was Yi Guchen, whom he hated to the bone. Swish. Morong Ditian drew his sword. As he drew his sword, an intense sword aura was released. The Scour Luo sword exploded with an extremely sharp sword light. As for Yi Guchen, he circulated the Azura power in his body. It spread along the edge of the sword. An extremely dense blood-red color entangled with the sword, giving off waves of fluctuations. Yi Guchen drew his sword. A demonic sword. Bringing along an intense blood-red sword aura, he clashed with Morong Ditian. The rest of the people from both sides also made their moves at almost the same time, engaging in a chaotic battle. As the two sides fought, true energy violently surged and ripples spread out. This caused those cultivators who wanted to snatch the spiritual herbs in the medicine field to curse inwardly. Shortly after, they hurriedly retreated. If they were caught in the crossfire, they would only be the unlucky ones. Although Bai Yanji, Zither Fairy and the rest weren't as powerful as Shinta Miao and the rest, they could still delay them. As for Su Jianshi, she was entangled with Xia Yubing, preventing her from making a move. Boom. Yi Guchen's sword collided with Morong Ditian once again. Feeling the intense rebounding force from the sword, Yi Guchen's eyes were filled with astonishment. If his meteor soft sword wasn't a divine weapon that was refined 100,000 times, the Scour Luo sword would have caused cracks to appear on it. The infant soul fruit is mine. Morong Ditian activated the spirit patterns on the Scour Luo sword. In an instant, an even more powerful sword aura erupted, sending Yi Guchen flying. He stretched out his hand and grabbed at the infant soul fruit. Yi Guchen's finger flickered, and rays of 6 pulse divine sword aura tore through the air. Morong Ditian turned around and blocked with his sword. Yi Guchen executed wave-like subtle steps. His figure flashed as he grabbed the infant soul fruit. Give it to me. Morong Ditian's expression turned serious as he executed the mysterious Heaven Sword Arts Minor trump card. Sword Sweeping 8 Desolation. 8 vigorous and domineering sword auras covered the sky as they swept over. With the support of the Scour Luo sword, their might was even more powerful. Yellow Spring. Yi Guqin also activated the power of Azura and executed the third move of the god-slaying sword art. A mighty sword aura blood river suddenly surged out and collided with the 8 sword auras. Boom! The violent sword auras actually tore the medicine field below into 2 halves. And in the split medicine field, a strange dark green branch appeared. It was a somewhat withered branch with 5 leaves that looked like they were carved from jade. On the leaves, there seemed to be a mysterious aura spreading out. That is, everyone's gaze instantly froze. Chapter 189. When the jade green branch appeared, all the Sky Prides present could feel a strange Taoist rhyme. It was as if their minds were instantly enlightened. Could that be the legendary Path Understanding Tree's branch? Some geniuses were bewildered. The Path Understanding Ancient Tree was a legendary panacea. Compared to medicine, its greatest effect was to aid in one's comprehension. It was rumored that a single leaf from the Path Understanding Ancient Tree could allow one to comprehend the grand Tao of heaven and earth. Not only that, with the assistance of the Path Understanding Tree's leaf, one would be able to comprehend all kinds of complicated martial arts, secret techniques, and so on. It could be said that even among the rare panacea, the Path Understanding Ancient Tree was the rarest. It's really the Path Understanding Ancient Tree's branch. This is a panacea, a true panacea. The surrounding geniuses' eyes were red as they stared at the withered branch that only had 5 dark green leaves left. If spiritual panacea was considered common and treasured panacea was considered rare, then panacea was a truly rare existence. Its rarity was comparable to that of heavenly lightning and other strange items. Even with the 7 major forces foundation, they only possess quasi-panacea that were close to the level of panacea. It could be said that true panacea could only be possessed by those top-notch sects and families of the South Horizon region. Go. At this moment, everyone's eyes were red. Even though Yi Guqin, Xia Yubing and the others were present, they didn't care anymore. Because the value of the Path Understanding Ancient Tree's leaf was too high. As long as one could obtain a leaf, it was possible to thoroughly comprehend a spiritual martial art and cultivate it to an extremely profound realm. This kind of opportunity could only be encountered and not sought. Let's go to. Yi Guqin and the others also directly attacked. Xia Yubing included. Previously, she didn't care much about the infant soul fruit, but now that the Path Understanding Ancient Tree's branch appeared, Xia Yubing's eyes were also burning with passion. Even experts like the North River Sword King wouldn't be able to obtain such a panacea. Murong Ditian also gave up on snatching the infant soul fruit from Yi Guqin and directly grabbed the Path Understanding Ancient Tree's branch. In just a moment, because of the appearance of the Path Understanding Ancient Tree's branch, an even more desperate chaotic battle started. Boom, boom, boom. The weaker Sky Prides were directly blasted out of the herb field, vomiting mouthfuls of blood. Yi Guqin used wave-like subtle steps. His figure was like a ghost as he moved between the numerous figures. He stretched out his hand and grabbed at the branch. Suddenly, a cold sword light swept over. Yi Guqin's face darkened. He swept out his meteorite soft sword, and a blood-red sword light burst out, colliding with the sword light. Xia Yubing's figure was graceful as she activated a trace of ice sword intent. The surrounding air was filled with cold air, and it seemed as if the air was about to freeze. Xia Yubing was determined to obtain the Tao Comprehension Leaf. After all, the Tao Comprehension Leaf was extremely beneficial towards comprehending sword intent. From this point of view, Xia Yubing and Yi Guqin's goals were the same. As Xia Yubing's cold qi spread out, those geniuses who didn't have the strength to fight were forced back. Those who were able to stay behind all had some ability. Yi Guqin activated the Heavenly Sun Profound Underworld Fire to isolate the cold qi emitted by Xia Yubing. On the other side, Su Jianshir's figure twisted as her figure flashed and arrived beside the Tao Comprehension Leaf's branch. Just as she was about to reach out, Murong Ditian's sword swept out. With the Mara sword's power, this sword's might was shocking. Damn it, Are you going to destroy the Tao Comprehension Leaf? Su Jianshi ground her teeth as she retreated. Boom. Sword chi exploded, and that withered branch was directly shattered by the sword chi. At this moment, many gazes filled with killing intent turned towards Morong Ditian. Even Morong Ditian's expression stiffened. No matter how strong his cultivation was, he couldn't withstand the fury of so many people. However, although that branch had been shattered, the 5 Tao Comprehension leaves were still intact. They were glowing with green light as they used the surging air to scatter in all directions. Snatch. At this moment, this was the only word left in everyone's hearts. Yi Guqin used the Book of Change's 64 hexagrams as his figure blurred like smoke. He directly reached out and grabbed a green Tao Comprehension leaf. Su Jianshi's slender waist twisted gracefully as she also obtained a Tao Comprehension leaf. On the other side, Xia Yubing's slender fingers continuously pointed, and several prodigies who wanted to fight for the Tao Comprehension leaves were frozen into ice sculptures. She pinched her fingers lightly and collected a leaf. On the other side, Zither Fairy and Bai Yinji also wanted to fight for a Tao Comprehension leaf, but they were forced back by Shinta Miao's ferocious saber light. Shinta Miao also obtained a Tao Comprehension leaf. In the blink of an eye, only 1 Tao Comprehension leaf remained. Murong Ditian used the mysterious heaven sword art, and his sword light split apart, forcing many prodigies back. He reached out and was about to grab a Tao Comprehension leaf. However, at this moment, a pitch-black sword light silently swept through the air. Murong Ditian's hair stood on end as he sensed a fatal danger. He took out the Mara sword, and the sword light slashed through the air as it collided with the pitch-black sword light. However, there wasn't the slightest sound of an explosion. The sword light that Murong Ditian released seemed to have been silently devoured by the pitch-black sword light. Whoosh! A pitch-black figure flew over at an extremely fast speed, and reached out to grab the last Tao Comprehension leaf. You! After seeing who it was, Murong Ditian's expression became very ugly. The one who had snatched the last Tao Comprehension leaf was none other than Yuan Mia. Even Murong Ditian, who had unsealed the Mara sword, didn't have the confidence to deal with Yuan Mia, who possessed the dark sword intent. Right now, Murong Ditian didn't obtain the infant soul fruit or the Tao Comprehension leaf. This made him almost want to vomit blood. It was like drawing water with a bamboo basket. Yuan Mia coldly glanced at Murong Ditian. Murong Ditian's expression became cold as he coldly snorted. The spirit herbs in the medicine field were almost all harvested. Seeing that there were no more opportunities here, the prodigies continued to rush into the depths of the cave. Let's go. Yi Guqin spoke. His harvest was rather plentiful. Just the infant soul fruit and the Tao Comprehension leaf were extremely valuable. Yi Guqin's group, Xia Yubing's group, and Yuan Mia's group all continued to go deeper. The deeper they went, the stronger the aura of a supremacy faintly emitted. Of course, the risk was also greater. From time to time, prodigies would accidentally touch the formations. There were many ferocious killing formations that were impossible to guard against. They could instantly kill a prodigy. Be careful. Su Jianshi took a step forward. There was a faint flash of light under her feet. Yi Guqin's eyes flashed. He directly pulled Su Jianshi over. A vigorous sword light suddenly erupted from the ground. It was enough to instantly kill a peak stage chi refinement martial artist. Su Jianshi's delicate body crashed into Yi Guqin's embrace due to inertia. Her face was flushed red. There are many dangers here. It's best to be careful. Yi Guqin's gaze also paused on the beautiful woman in his arms, whose face was as beautiful as peach blossoms for a moment. Su Jianshi quietly raised her head. Her gaze collided with Yi Guqin's as her heart raced. Right at this moment, a prodigy's miserable howl suddenly came from not far away. An extremely grand sword formation was activated. It erupted with boundless sword chi. That's... Yi Guqin turned his head and looked over. He could vaguely see a cave within the boundless sword formation. There were countless sword marks in the cave. They were densely packed and disorderly. Could this be the place where that supremacy practiced his sword? Yi Guqin's eyes shone brightly. If that Heaven Palace realm supremacy was really a sword cultivator, then his sword technique must be extraordinary. If one could comprehend it, the benefits would be immeasurable. Chapter 190. Most sword experts had a place they were used to practicing their swordsmanship. It could be on a cliff, in front of a sword-testing rock, or in the depths of a forest. Some sword cultivators with truly profound cultivation would leave behind sword marks that contain Taoist rhymes. Some sword cultivators even used sword marks as a legacy and integrated their own sword arts into it, leaving it for talented juniors to comprehend. Under the cover of the infinity sword formation, there seemed to be sword chi buzzing in the cave. The stone walls of the cave were also densely covered with countless sword marks. To a sword cultivator, this was a rare opportunity and comprehension. But for martial artists who were not sword cultivators, it did not have that much attraction. Let's go somewhere else. The opportunities in this sword cavern are of no use to us. Moreover, only sword cultivators have the chance to enter that sword array. Some of the geniuses shook their heads in disappointment. However, the Venerable Realm's cave was extremely vast, and the opportunities definitely weren't limited to this one. Therefore, these prodigies weren't too disappointed and directly went to other places. Young Master Dugu will also go and look for other opportunities, Zither Fairy and Bai Yinji said. One of them used a zither, while the other used a saber. The opportunities here were useless to them. Be careful. Yi Guqin nodded lightly. On the other side, Prince Yuanyi, Shen Miao, and the others also left to look for other opportunities. Now only Yi Guqin, Su Jianshi, Xia Yubing, Yuan Mia, and Morong Ditian remained outside the sword cavern. The situation suddenly became strange. Venerable Realm Sword Cavern. Yuan Mia's single eye fluctuated. He was the first to make a move. As his figure flashed, he seemed to transform into a pitch-black sword and plunged into the infinity sword formation. Let's go. Whether it was Xia Yubing or Yi Guqin and the others, they didn't want others to beat them to it. Therefore, almost at the same time as Yuan Mia plunged out, they also flashed into the infinity sword formation. As soon as he entered the sword formation, Yi Guqin felt the surrounding sword chi rushing towards him. Yi Guqin held the fallen star soft sword in his hand. His sword will of hardness and softness spread out, using softness to overcome hardness. When those surging sword chis landed in front of Yi Guqin, they were all deflected by Yi Guqin's soft sword. They were deflected to the left and right, unable to cause too much damage to Yi Guqin. Of course, this was because Yi Guqin possessed hard and soft sword insight, and that was why he was able to use such a trick. Elemental annihilation was like a sword of the underworld, emitting boundless black sword light as it broke through the formation. Xia Yubing also used the ice sword intent. The surrounding sword chi froze, unable to approach her. As for Su Jianshi, she had the enlightened sword heart, and had an extraordinary understanding of sword formations. She quickly found a safe way to break the formation. She twisted her waist and quickly flew towards the sword cavern. As for Morong Ditian, he used the Mara sword to protect himself and forcefully charged through. Although he suffered from the attacks of numerous sword chis, with a top-grade spirit rune divine weapon protecting him, he was still able to persevere. For non-sword cultivators, such an infinity sword formation would be extremely difficult to break through, and it would be extremely dangerous. However, it wasn't a killing formation for Yi Guqin and the other sword geniuses. Finally, they all passed through the infinity sword formation. As soon as they entered the sword cavern, Yi Guqin felt the surrounding sword-based Taoist rhymes. This was a place for Sky Palace realm sovereigns to practice their swords. To sword cultivators, this was an absolute opportunity that could only be encountered by chance. Especially Su Jianshi, who possessed the enlightened sword heart. At this moment, her beautiful face froze. Her eyes seemed to be filled with doubt and enlightenment. It was as if she was listening to some almighty preaching. In this sword cavern, anyone who casually attacks will be my enemy, Elemental Annihilation said with a hoarse voice. It was obvious that such an opportunity couldn't be wasted. If someone were to fight here, it would definitely disturb the aura of this place. At that time, the gains wouldn't make up for the losses. How can such an opportunity be wasted? Xia Yubing smiled faintly, and chose to sit cross-legged in front of a stone wall. Elemental Annihilation and Murong Ditian did the same. Su Jianshi, on the other hand, seemed to be in a daze as she stared at the sword marks on the stone wall. The sword marks of a sovereign were absolute treasures to those with the enlightened sword heart. It's a pity that I haven't reached the enlightened sword heart yet. Yi Guqian was slightly regretful, but he wasn't disappointed. Although he hadn't reached the enlightened sword heart, he had already condensed the seed of the sword heart. In addition to his talent as a sword devil, his comprehension ability wasn't much worse than Su Jianshi's. Yi Guqian wasn't in a hurry to sit down. Instead, he scanned the surroundings of the sword cavern. The sword marks on the stone wall were a mess. It was obvious that they were formed by many complicated sword arts. If one's talent in the sword Dao wasn't enough, they would only see countless chaotic sword moves and wouldn't be able to piece together a complete sword art. Among these sword marks, there are the most ordinary sword arts, Xiantian sword arts, spirit sword arts, and even king sword arts. Yi Guqian's eyes shone with a strange light. It seemed that this sovereign sword cultivator was also someone with extraordinary vision. He didn't blindly ask for the best sword arts. Even ordinary Xiantian sword arts could be comprehended from the sword cavern. This was the vision of a sovereign sword cultivator. Yi Guqian had already comprehended this level. Low-grade sword cultivators might be able to comprehend ordinary sword arts from the stone wall. Mid-grade sword cultivators might be able to comprehend Xiantian sword arts. High-grade sword cultivators might be able to comprehend spirit sword arts. Only the most talented sword cultivators can obtain the few king-level sword techniques on the sword cavern stone walls. Yi Guqian's eyes flashed. This was a great opportunity for him. He swept his gaze across the stone wall, and suddenly discovered a few familiar sword marks. That familiar destructive power made Yi Guqian's eyes light up with surprise. How could there be such a coincidence? The god-slaying sword art. Yi Guqian suppressed the surprise in his heart, and sat cross-legged on the ground to comprehend it. The god-slaying sword art he obtained was only an incomplete version, but it was already comparable to a spirit sword art. If it was the complete god-slaying sword art, how powerful would it be? Yi Guqian had always wanted to obtain it, but he didn't expect to obtain it without any effort. However, it's already extremely difficult to extract the trajectory of the god-slaying sword art's sword marks from these thousands of sword marks, let alone comprehend the complete god-slaying sword art. Yi Guqian thought to himself. While thinking, he suddenly took out the leaf of enlightenment that he had obtained previously. After hesitating for a moment, he put it in his mouth. As soon as the leaf of enlightenment entered his mouth, Yi Guqian felt saliva in his mouth and teeth, and his mind instantly became extremely clear. It was as if a dusty mirror had been polished by a piece of white cloth. As expected of a top-grade divine medicine. Just a leaf has such an effect. Yi Guqian was delighted. His mind was extremely clear and his thoughts were instantly clear. He already had extremely high talent in the sword Dao, and now with the help of the leaf of enlightenment, his comprehension reached a terrifying level. The originally chaotic sword marks in Yi Guqian's mind instantly reduced, and became clear. In the end, only the sword moves of the god-slaying sword art were left. Then Yi Guqian sank into comprehension. As if they had been enlightened by Yi Guqian, the others also took out the leaf of enlightenment, and put it in their mouths to comprehend the stone wall. Only Murong Ditian's expression was somewhat ugly. Among the 5 people present, only he didn't have the leaf of enlightenment. Therefore he would be at a disadvantage in comprehending the sword moves. Chapter 191. Time passed silently in the sword cavern. Because the sword cavern was protected by the infinite sword formation, no random person could enter. In such a silent atmosphere, Yi Guqian and the other 4 people also stared at the stone wall, trying to comprehend the strongest swordsmanship from it. Yi Guqian had already cultivated the first 3 moves of the god-slaying sword technique, so it was easy for him to comprehend them. In addition to his talent and the epiphany leaf, Yi Guqian's understanding of the god-slaying sword technique became deeper and deeper. It was as if an illusory figure was practicing the god-slaying sword technique in his mind. The first move, Blood Massacre. The second move, demon only. The third move, underworld. At this point, the illusory figure in his mind seemed to be stuck. However, Yi Guchen looked at the sword mark on the stone wall and visualized the evolution of the sword technique. The figure in his mind moved again. The fourth move, 3 roads. There was a river in the underworld called the 3 Roads River. The power of this move was even more terrifying than that of the underworld. However, the illusory figure in his mind did not stop his sword technique. Then the 5th move was revealed. Then the 6th move. The complete version of the god-slaying sword technique had a total of 6 moves. Yi Guchen's eyes shone with unprecedented excitement. This was a great opportunity. The complete version of the god-slaying sword technique, the 4th move, 3 roads, was already comparable to a top-tier spiritual level sword technique. As for the 5th and 6th moves, they had already reached the power of a king-level sword technique. Yi Guchen had obtained his first king-level sword technique. Moreover, it was a king-level sword technique that focused on killing. Once it was used, its lethality would be shocking. Entering this venerable one's cave is indeed a great opportunity. Yi Guchen's breathing quickened. Although a spiritual level sword technique was powerful, it was like a natural chasm compared to a king-level sword technique. The power was incomparable. Moreover, with the foundation of the first 3 moves, Yi Guchen would be able to practice the king-level god-slaying sword technique more easily. Just as Yi Guchen's emotions were fluctuating, he also realized that the epiphany leaf in his mouth seemed to have melted and was gradually dissipating. Sadly, it is only a leaf of the Tree of Enlightenment. If I could acquire an entire Tree of Enlightenment, then I would have an endless supply of leaves. Yi Guchen shook his head and threw this greedy thought to the back of his head. After obtaining the god-slaying sword technique, Yi Guchen did not stop visualizing, but continued to comprehend. Although the enlightenment leaf had dissipated, a portion of its essence had permanently merged with Yi Guchen's consciousness, increasing his comprehension by a little. In Yi Guchen's mind, the illusory figure began to practice the sword again. In addition to the god-slaying sword technique, the boundless heaven sword technique, the void sword technique, the shadow-killing sword technique, the Tai Chi sword technique, etc. However, as time passed, the illusory figure in his mind gradually faded away. Only when Yi Guchen had truly comprehended the heart integrated into sword would he be able to form a permanent illusory figure in his mind and carry out sword deduction. On the other side, Morong Ditian and the others gradually woke up. Morong Ditian's expression was unsightly. He had comprehended a spirit-level sword technique. Afterwards, Xia Yubing and Yuan Mie opened their eyes at the same time. An incomplete king-level sword technique. Xia Yubing muttered in her heart, seemingly dissatisfied. Yuan Mie's eyes also had a trace of unwillingness as he muttered, "I will come here again." What he had comprehended was also an incomplete king-level sword technique. An incomplete king-level sword technique's power was at most equivalent to a supreme spirit-level sword technique. Finally, it was Su Jianshi. She had also spent the most time, but at this moment, she also opened her bright eyes. The surprise that flashed through her eyes clearly did not escape Yi Guchen's eyes. However, Su Jianshi was very smart. She did not reveal too much, nor did she say what she had comprehended. Instead, she winked at Yi Guchen. "Let's go. We've already spent too much time here." Yi Guchen waved his hand. Not only had he obtained a complete king-level sword technique, but he had also made progress in the boundless heaven sword technique and other spirit-level sword techniques. He had broken through his bottleneck. The harvest this time was bountiful. Afterwards, the 5 of them left the sword cavern. After leaving the sword cavern, Su Jianshi whispered to Yi Guchen. She had indeed comprehended a king-level sword technique. Yi Guchen was not surprised. With the sword heart illumination and the enlightenment leaf, it would be strange if she could not comprehend a king-level sword technique. Young Master Degu seems to have gained a lot this time. Not far away, Xia Yubing's gaze swept over. Testing me? Yi Guchen thought in his heart. However, he shook his head indifferently and said, "Just some gains." He naturally could not reveal that he had comprehended a complete king-level sword technique. This was also one of his trump cards. Yi Guchen and Xia Yubing were both on guard as they rushed into the depths of the cavern at the same time. It had to be said that there were many fortuitous opportunities in the venerable cavern. The deeper they went, the more Yiguchen saw a spirit liquid pool formed by spirit liquid, spirit crystal herb field, sword cavern, and spirit liquid pool. These were only a small part of the fortuitous opportunities in the venerable cavern. No wonder the 7 major factions value this venerable cavern so much. If I can obtain a venerable cavern, it would be equivalent to obtaining a precious place to nurture my sect's disciples, Yiguchen thought to himself. He had also obtained some spirit liquid to use in the future when he broke through. However, Yiguchen knew that although the herb field, sword cavern, and spirit liquid pool were all precious places, the venerable cavern was not simple. However, the opportunities in the Venerable One's cave abode were obviously not that simple. It was only because they had not stepped into the true depths of the cave abode. The true foundation of a venerable cavern was far beyond what Qi refinement realm cultivators like them could imagine. In front is the group of geniuses, including Yiguchen, once again walked into the depths of the cavern. Suddenly, a blood-red door appeared in front of them. It was placed horizontally at the entrance of the passageway, blocking their way. It seems that behind that blood-red door is the true foundation of a venerable cavern. Yiguchen vaguely sensed something. The group of geniuses was somewhat hesitant. After all, no one knew what was behind that blood-red door. Just as Yiguchen was staring at the blood-red door, the golden core in his origin ring with the 5 mythical beasts imprinted on it suddenly trembled slightly. This golden core? Yiguchen was puzzled. Yiguchen had found this 5-colored golden core, and the 5 mythical beasts' ancient jade in the bottomless demon abyss. At this moment, the trembling of the golden core confused Yiguchen. Nothing ventured, nothing gained. The venerable cavern is right in front of us. Finally, one of the geniuses could not resist the greed in his heart. He directly rushed to the blood-red door, pressed his hands on it, and began to push. The 5-colored golden core in Yiguchen's origin ring trembled even more violently. This trembling gave Yiguchen an extreme sense of uneasiness. At the same time, as the blood-red door opened, a faint murderous aura spread out. "Let's go." Yiguchen patted Su Jianshir's shoulder. Zither Fairy and Bai Yinji, who had gathered with them, also looked at Yiguchen. "Let's go." Yiguchen and the others hurriedly retreated. At the same time, Xia Yubing's side also abruptly retreated. The blood-red door was finally pushed open by that genius. The moment the door opened, a ferocious and enormous black shadow directly swallowed that genius. Chapter 192. Although that genius wasn't as strong as Xia Yubing, Yiguchen, and the others, he was still a genius who had reached the 8th cycle of Qi refinement. However, he was swallowed by the black shadow without even having the chance to react. When the black shadow slowly revealed itself, the faces of all the geniuses turned pale, and their lips trembled. This black shadow was shockingly a python-like demonic beast. Its entire body was covered in pitch-black scales that seemed to be cast from gold and iron. Its python head was incomparably ferocious. What was even more shocking was that there seemed to be 2 black horns protruding from its head. "That's a 5th-grade black dragon python." Some of the geniuses cried out in shock. A 5th-grade monster was comparable to a hidden gate of life and death. Yiguchen's pupils suddenly shrank. From the pressure and evil aura emanating from the black dragon python, he could tell that it had reached the peak of the 5th grade. This black dragon python is even stronger than the heavenly fire golden eyes beast that Jun Xiaoyao fought before. Yiguchen quickly retreated. A 5th-grade monster like the heavenly fire golden eyes beast was comparable to a hidden gate of life and death. However, a 5th-grade monster like the black dragon python was comparable to a spiritual bridge of life and death. It was invincible. Yiguchen was very decisive. He knew that the venerable cavern was definitely not that simple. They couldn't go any further, and could only retreat. Yiguchen, Xia Yubing, and the others were the first to retreat, so they were also the furthest away from the black dragon python. The black dragon python, on the other hand, was filled with evil aura and was extremely ferocious. Its bloody mouth could easily swallow a genius. The various martial arts techniques of the geniuses couldn't cause any real damage to the black dragon python. Looking at the one-sided slaughter, Yi Guchen sighed slightly. At the same time, the five-colored golden core in his vital ring trembled, even more violently with the appearance of the black dragon python. What does the five-colored golden core have to do with the black dragon python? Or does the black dragon python have some effect on the five-colored golden core? Yi Guchen was puzzled. However, he couldn't verify anything right now, let alone attack the black dragon python. The black dragon python should have a trace of atavistic dragon blood in its body. This five-colored golden core also has the azure dragon totem. This is the only connection between them. However, this matter should be left for the future. This was the only thing Yi Guchen could think of. The black dragon python continued to pursue them from behind. Yi Guchen and the others used their extreme speed to quickly leave the cave. Finally, they emerged from the pitch-black underground cave and arrived at the center of the stone forest. Hiss! As soon as the incomparably thick black dragon python emerged from the underground cave, the inscriptions on the surface of the surrounding 9 stone pillars flickered, as if some kind of sealing array had been activated. The black dragon python's body was instantly trapped, and it could only let out an unwilling roar that shook the sky. The roar caused the faces of the sky prides who had barely managed to escape to turn pale, and fear lingered in their hearts. Many martial artists had entered the ancient stone forest, but less than a tenth of them had managed to escape. Most of them had been killed by the spirit siphoning bugs, the cave's array, and the black dragon python. Moreover, they had not truly obtained the opportunity of the cave. Everyone knew that the real opportunity of this venerable cave was most likely behind the blood-colored door guarded by the black dragon python. Unfortunately, with this peak rank 5 demonic beast guarding it, they would definitely not be able to break through with their chi refinement realm strength. This was also the reason why the 7 superpowers were able to safely allow them to enter first to obtain the opportunity. Let's leave this stone forest first. Yi Guchen waved his hand. With the black dragon python's presence, it was impossible for them to enter the cave again. The only thing they could do now was to leave the stone forest first, and then seize the ownership of this cave. Is this finally the moment? Yi Guchen muttered in his heart. The remaining sky prides all left this place and walked out of the ancient stone forest. Outside the stone forest, the 7 superpowers and a large number of martial artists were all waiting quietly. They all knew that the Venerable One's cave abode was the final destination of the elite meeting. Whoever could truly obtain this cave would be the most eye-catching existence in this elite meeting. Oh, they're out. Some of the spectating martial artists also saw a few sparse figures walking out of the stone forest. There are only so few people left. Many of the martial artists were shocked. Greed is not enough, Xiantai sneered from the Limitless Sword Sex camp. It could be said that he was determined to obtain this venerable cave. At the same time, Xiantai also knew that most of the people who entered to obtain the opportunity did not have the chance to come out alive. As time passed, a small number of people, including Yi Guchen, walked out of the stone forest. Seeing Yi Guchen walk out unscathed, Qin Baijian and the other 2 experts' faces darkened. They had hoped that Yi Guchen would die in the venerable cave. That way, they would not have to do anything. Unfortunately, the situation did not develop as they had expected. Sensing the murderous gazes of the 3 experts, Yi Guchen's expression remained calm. As long as he obtained this venerable cave, all life and death crises would be easily resolved. As all the remaining geniuses came out, the entire place fell into an eerie silence. In this silence, only the sound of sand whistling could be heard. Whether it was the 7 superpowers or the tens of thousands of spectating martial artists, they all held their breaths, because they knew that the following battle would be the most tragic. The remaining prodigies would fight for the final rights to this venerable cave. Now it's interesting. Xiantai lowered his head and looked down. Qingqi, who do you think will be the final winner of this elite meeting? Elder Qinghe asked. This. According to strength, the most likely winners should be Xia Yubing, Yuan Mia, and Shinta Miao. However, Dugu Wubai has the battle record of killing Qin Aoshi. He is also a strong dark horse. Chu Qingqi hesitated. However, he also sighed. It was a pity that Yi Guchen did not come. Xia Shishir and Xiaoying of the Xia family were among the spectating crowd. There will only be one biggest winner of this elite meeting, and that's Sister Yubing. Xiaoying's gaze was fanatical as she stared at Xia Yubing. In her heart, Xia Yubing was an unparalleled genius. On the other hand, Xia Shishir's gaze quietly fell on Yi Guqin's figure. Xia Shishir felt an indescribable sense of familiarity towards the young man who had saved her. On the other side, Princess Yuanyang was also among the spectating crowd. She did not pass the third stage, so she did not have the qualifications to participate in the fourth stage. Yi Guqin, you really didn't come. If that incident hadn't happened in the Sword King's secret realm back then, perhaps the one who shines in this elite meeting would not be Xia Yubing, but your sword sex Yi Guqin. Princess Yuanyang shook her head. There was a hint of disappointment in her eyes and bitterness at the corner of her mouth. The figure she was infatuated with did not even have the courage to participate in the elite meeting? Big brother, you must win. In the crowd, the petite Shui clenched her small hands in front of her chest as if she was praying. At this moment, everyone had different thoughts in their hearts. However, the only thing they had in common was that they were all looking forward to the real final battle. Chapter 193. Outside the ancient stone forest, strong winds swept up the yellow sand, whistling endlessly. Although there were tens of thousands of people in the surroundings, there wasn't the slightest bit of noise. Instead, it was extremely quiet. It was so quiet that it seemed as if they were waiting for something. Outside the stone forest, neither Xia Yubing nor Yi Guqin moved. She's really patient. Yi Guqin glanced at Xia Yubing from the corner of his eye. Xia Yubing was a very shrewd person. He didn't believe that she wasn't prepared, nor did he believe that she didn't have any trump cards. However, although Xia Yubing was unfathomable, Yi Guqin wasn't a pushover either. As if sensing the heavy atmosphere, Chu Shiqing, Song Daojin and the other Heaven's Prides exchanged a glance before leaving with a bitter smile. They directly gave up on fighting for the venerable cave dwelling. They knew that with their strength, trying to take the cave dwelling was no different from a mantis trying to stop a chariot. Rather than being beaten back by others, it was better for them to retreat first. There were quite a few Heaven's Prides who had such thoughts, but there were also quite a few who wanted to fight with their lives on the line. There are quite a few people who aren't afraid of death. Shin Miao rested the terrifying saber on his shoulder as he scanned the surroundings and shook his head with a cold smile. In such a situation, those who didn't retreat had the mentality to fight with their lives on the line. After all, apart from the Sword Sect Tower Forest where Wind Sweeping Building was, the other 6 factions had all thrown out tempting chips. It could be said that whoever obtained the venerable cave dwelling would ascend to the heavens in a single bound, and become the most dazzling existence in the entire Saint Origin Empire. Their future would also be limitlessly bright. There were quite a few Heaven's Prides who were willing to risk their lives for a future. I want this cave dwelling. Whoever wants to fight, feel free to come. Yuan Mia stepped forward with a blood-stained sword in his hand as he scanned the surroundings with his deathly still eyes. TSK, as expected of the second on the Heaven's Pride list. How bold. Yuan Mia is a rare sword's Heaven's Pride. Like Xia Yubing, he has comprehended sword intent. He is one of the most likely candidates to obtain the venerable cave dwelling. Regardless of whether it was the spectators or the 7 forces, they all began to whisper to each other. However, no one thought that Yuan Mia was overestimating himself. His strength was indeed worthy of his current cold arrogance. Yuan Mia, how dare a bastard like you talk nonsense here? Prince Yuanyi stood out and said in a cold tone. How could he sit back and watch Yuan Mia obtain this venerable immortal abode? If he really got it, he would be completely left behind by Yuan Mia. Therefore, Prince Yuanyi could not let Yuan Mia get the cave abode no matter what. Although I can't kill you due to orders, it shouldn't be a problem to teach you a lesson. Yuan Mia's eyes were cold. His figure suddenly disappeared, and appeared in front of Prince Yuan Yi in an instant. Prince Yuanyi's expression changed as he hurriedly took out the heavenly sacred 5 elements wheel. This was like a fuse, completely igniting the quiet atmosphere. This supremacy's cave abode is mine. One of the Sky Prides suddenly attacked the Sky Prides beside him with bloodshot eyes. If I can get my hands on this cavern, I'll have a meteoric rise, and I'll be able to choose any of the 7 great powers. Kill. I'll fight to the death and come back from the jaws of death. I'll obtain the greatest opportunity. The whole situation was like a bomb that completely detonated. Boom. 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 Countless streams of true chi intertwined violently, scattering the wind and sand in the sky. That kind of crazy attack caused the spectators to be speechless, and they were secretly shocked in their hearts. Let's get into formation. The upper echelons of the 7 great powers acted almost at the same time. Powerful surging true chi overflowed and intertwined with each other, forming a giant true chi shield that covered a large area outside the stone forest. It became the battlefield for these Sky Prides to fight, and at the same time, prevent the true chi from spreading and attacking the crowd. Within the true chi shield, the Sky Prides fought wildly and fiercely. Even if they died in such a bloody battle, the forces behind them could not complain because they were willing to do so. Song Daojin and Chu Shiqing, who were outside the true chi shield, stared at Yi Guqin's figure. After Yi Guqin saved their lives, they had a guess in their hearts, but they could not confirm it. The reason for that was because they felt that this was too absurd and unreal. Duguwubai, who are you? Chu Shiqing's eyes flashed with a strange light as she muttered to herself. Yi Guqin was still standing calmly within the protective shield of his vital energy. He was watching the elites fighting each other. Silly boy, what should we do? Su Jianshi asked. She didn't have any thoughts about the venerable cave. As for Zither Fairy and Bai Yanji, they also had an accurate understanding of their own strength. With their strength, they couldn't obtain the cave, so they tactfully didn't make a move. Wait a bit. She hasn't made a move yet. Yi Guqin narrowed his eyes and looked at Xia Yubing. Xia Yubing's expression was as calm as a virgin's. In the midst of the fierce battle, she was like a snow lotus that stood aloof from the world. If he didn't have his previous experience, just by looking at Xia Yubing, she was indeed an otherworldly beauty. However, only Yi Guqin, who knew the truth, understood how cold and dark her heart was under such a beautiful appearance. Xia Yubing, I'm going to tear off your mask. Yi Guqin's gaze was extremely sharp. That Murong Ditian was actually injured. Suddenly, cries of surprise rang out from the crowd of spectators. Murong Ditian, who possessed the Mara sword, was definitely one of the strongest opponents. However, at this moment, a gray-robed man was attacking him without fear of death. Damn it. Who are you? I have no enmity with you, but you actually attacked me so ruthlessly. Murong Ditian's expression was unsightly as blood flowed from the corner of his mouth. He was also caught off guard by this gray-robed man's sneak attack and suffered heavy injuries. However, the gray-robed man didn't say a word. Instead, his attacks became fiercer and fiercer. The gray-robed man slowly raised his hand, and a terrifying sword chi soared into the sky. This is the killing move of a spirit-grade sword art. Murong Ditian's mouth twitched as he tightly gripped the Mara sword in his hand. He originally thought that his opponent would be Xia Yubing, Duguwubai and the others. However, he didn't expect that he would be in such a sorry state against a gray-robed man. Mysterious Heaven Sword Art, sword shaking the universe. Murong Ditian also used the killing move of the Mysterious Heaven Sword Art, and collided with the gray-robed man. Ferocious sword chi spread out in all directions, causing the surrounding Sky Prides to spit out blood as they were sent flying. That gray-robed man is actually so powerful. I have never heard of his name before. The gray-robed man seems to be called Hongchen Shui. He didn't reveal his strength in the previous rounds, and only now did he reveal his full strength. However, why do I feel that every move of hers is a killing move? What kind of deep hatred does she have with that Murong Ditian? The spectators were all whispering to each other. Obviously, they were very curious about Hongchen Shui who had suddenly attacked. Yi Guqin's gaze turned towards the gray-robed man as he frowned slightly. He had a vague feeling in his heart, but he couldn't explain it clearly. Chapter 194. Just as the battle between the geniuses reached its climax, Xia Yubing, who had been silent all this while, finally made a move. She took light steps and slowly stepped forward. With every step she took, the sword intent in her body would spread a little. In the end, a terrifying sword intent soared into the sky, as if it was going to sweep in all directions. As the sword intent spread, the surrounding temperature rapidly dropped, and snowflakes began to fall from the sky. This was simply inconceivable. The heavenly wasteland plains was a place where gales howled all year round, and yellow sand filled the sky. Yet, at this moment, snowflakes were falling. Although it was only limited to a small region outside the stone forest, it was enough to make people speechless and feel astonished. Xia Yubing walked out in the wind and snow just like that, like an ice goddess, and had an awe-inspiring temperament. The snowflakes fluttering in the air also caused the many heavens prides who were fighting to stop. Their gazes all turned towards Xia Yubing in shock. Even Morong Ditian, Hongchen Shui, Shinta Miao, Prince Yuanyi, Yuan Mia, and other top-notch geniuses temporarily stopped and looked at Xia Yubing with extremely serious gazes. Everyone, it's already meaningless to continue fighting because this abode will be obtained by Yubing. Xia Yubing spoke with a voice that was cold like ice. Xia Yubing, although you're a genius, you can't be so domineering, a genius said indignantly. Oh, is that so? Looks like Yubing hasn't displayed enough strength and skills. Xia Yubing shook her head indifferently. Just as that genius wanted to say something, his body suddenly froze, and the snowflakes that fell on him directly turned into rays of sword qi, piercing into his body. With a plop, that genius directly fell to the ground, dead. Such a method made the hearts of many spectators go cold, and their backs go numb. Could it be that she's already taken that step? Even Yuan Mia, who was always serious, had his pupils shrink at this moment. Because only he, who had also comprehended sword intent, understood what it meant. Xia Yubing's comprehension of the sword intent of ice had almost reached the extreme, which was why she had such a shocking method. At this moment, the world was silent. Snowflakes fluttered, making Xia Yubing look like a fairy exiled from a snowy mountain. The gazes of the 7 great forces and tens of thousands of cultivators all landed on her. At this moment, Xia Yubing was the most eye-catching existence in this world. Finally, we've reached this step. Although Xia Yubing's expression was calm, great waves were surging in her heart. She had finally succeeded in realizing her ambition, becoming the most dazzling existence in this world, and even the entire Saint Origin dynasty. Today, Yubing will be bold once again. Not only will I inherit the Venerable One's abode, I will also inherit the name of the sword sect. Xia Yubing said with a clear and cold voice. As soon as these words came out, everyone was shocked. Even some of the higher-ups of the 7 great powers had never imagined that Xia Yubing would actually possess such ambition. Not only did she intend to seize an exalt abode, she even intended to seize Yi Guqin's title of Sword Master. Many martial artists were also in an uproar as they discussed animatedly. However, Xia Yubing's methods from before still greatly intimidated them. Adding on the fact that the rumored sword sect's Yi Guqin had never appeared, the majority of the people still leaned towards Xia Yubing. That's right, we support Miss Xia to inherit the title of Swordmaster. That Yi Guqin, he's not worthy. Someone shouted from the crowd. No one knew that he was a disciple of the Xia family. That's right, Yi Guqin is just a coward. Even now, the elite meeting has ended and he still hasn't appeared. He's afraid of Miss Xia. What qualifications does a dog-shit genius like him have to be called Sword Master? Miss Xia will be the new Sword Master. In the beginning, there were only a few people shouting. However, in the end, it almost became a wave of voices that covered the sky and covered the earth as they shouted Xia Yubing's name. Xia Yubing's lips curled into a faint smile. This was the effect she wanted. Ever since the elite meeting had proposed to remove the title of Sword Master, Xia Yubing had been building momentum for herself. Her strong performance along the way, as well as suppressing the other geniuses, were all for her own sake. In the end, with the cooperation of the chess pieces she had arranged to guide the public opinion, she successfully became the successor of Sword Master. It had to be said that from every angle, Xia Yubing's plan could be said to be perfect. However, Yi Guqin had never appeared. This was the reason why Xia Yubing dared to carry out this plan. This little girl's schemes are a bit deep. Sword Sect Pagoda Forest's Elder Qing, he shook his head. He didn't like this kind of shrewd genius. Brother Yisai? Chu Qingqi shook his head, slightly disappointed. It seems that the title of Sword Master will be inherited by Xia Yubing. Xiantai was considering how to take Xia Yubing into the limitless sword sect. As if seeing that the situation had been decided, the smile on Xia Yubing's lips could no longer be suppressed. After waiting for so long, this day has finally come. Yi Guchen, I'm no longer that weak girl who would only follow behind you and stand in the shadow of your light. I will inherit everything you have. Let me replace you, to shine with endless brilliance. Xia Yubing muttered in her heart. Her aura erupted uncontrollably. This aura wasn't just made up of true qi, but also contained traces of soul power. This pressure, half-step divine soul. The surrounding geniuses looked at Xia Yubing in disbelief. Even geniuses like Yuan Mie and Shinta Miao were only at the peak of the 9th cycle of qi refining. As for Xia Yubing, she had been hiding her aura all this time. But she had already reached half-step divine soul. Xia Yubing hid her strength so deeply. Su Jianshi and the others were shocked. When Xia Yubing truly revealed the strength of a half-step divine soul, all of the geniuses present were intimidated. The crowd cheered even louder for Xia Yubing becoming the new sword master. It seems that this gathering is over. The final victor is indeed Xia Yubing, muttered Xiantai. The people from the 7 factions all believed that the dust had settled, and that there was no need to compete anymore. Xia Yubing's aura, cultivation, and every other aspect had suppressed everyone present. There was no doubt that she would be the final victor. Damn it, why did this woman have to win in the end? There's also that sword master Yi Guchen. I've always thought of him as a worthy opponent, but he didn't even appear. This is infuriating. Su Jianshi puffed up her cheeks and stomped her feet in resentment. Then do you want him to appear? The youth beside Su Jianshi, who had been silent all this time, suddenly spoke. Silly boy, what do you mean? Su Jianshi was a little confused. She looked at Yi Guchen in confusion. It's time, said Yi Guchen with a smile. He patted Su Jianshi's shoulder and slowly stepped forward. At this moment, Su Jianshi, Zither Fairy, and Bai Yanji were all surprised by Yi Guchen's actions. Thank you for not abandoning me. Since that's the case, Yubing will officially take over the title of Sword Master and become. Xia Yubing's voice was cold as it spread in all directions. However, before she could finish speaking, a cold shout resounded through the heavens and earth. Are you worthy of the title of Sword Master? This cold shout was like the edge of a sword that fiercely cut through the clamor between the heavens and earth. For a moment, it was as if all the voices had been cut off. Everyone's gazes uniformly landed on the black-robed youth who was slowly walking out. Dugu Wu Bai, what qualifications do you have to say such words? Xia Yubing coldly rebuked. She frowned in annoyance. In her eyes, although Dugu Wu Bai was a threat, she was a half-step divine soul cultivator. She might be able to suppress him. Oh, if Dugu Wu Bai's identity isn't enough, then what about this identity? Yi Guchen revealed a cold smile. He slowly raised his hand, placed it against his chin, and slowly tore off the disguise mask. As the mask fell off, his ordinary face disappeared. What replaced it was a cold and arrogant face with sharp eyebrows and bright eyes. At the same time, he took out his iconic Tribulation Dust Sword. He slowly raised the sword and pointed its tip at Xia Yubing. I am the Sword Master. Who dares to challenge me? Chapter 195. I am the Sword Sect. Who dares to challenge me? When Yi Guchen uttered these words, the already quiet atmosphere became even more deathly still, to the point of suffocation. Among the tens of thousands of spectators, there were quite a few who supported Xia Yubing. However, at this moment, those clamors and shouts seemed to be stuck in their throats. Every single cultivator's face was flushed red, and their eyes were wide open. They felt as if they were hallucinating as they stared at the youth who had removed his mask. This person is. Some people's teeth were even trembling. That familiar yet unfamiliar face made everyone feel as if they were in a dream. Dugu Wu Bai, is the sword sex Yiguchen. Someone let out a cry of disbelief, incomparably shocked. Whoosh, a tidal wave of uproar surged out like a surging tide. Not to mention the tens of thousands of spectators. Even the people from the 7 major factions had stunned expressions on their faces. All along, Xia Yubing had belittled, looked down upon, and viewed as a coward by everyone. Not only had the sword sex Yiguchen come, he had even transformed into the Dugu Wubai, right before their eyes. In the first round, he had shocked everyone with his talent, becoming a potential dark horse. In the second round, he had unleashed his sword in a rage for a beauty, killing Qin Batian and the other 2 geniuses. In the third round, he had defeated Lu Tianying, and even lasted 15 minutes against the Sun Moon Hall's divine soul realm genius, Xianing. In the fourth round, he had defeated the bloody battle spear monarch, Qin Aoshi, in a domineering manner. Such battle results had never appeared in the history of the Elite Association. Therefore, this made everyone pay close attention to the sudden appearance of the dark horse, Dugu Wubai. They even believed that he was not inferior to Yuan Mia, Shen Miao, Xia Yubing and the others, and was a true peak genius. But now, the Dugu Wubai that made everyone feel incomparably shocked was actually the coward Yiguchen that Xia Yubing had ridiculed and had never appeared. Such a change, as if heaven and earth had turned upside down, caused everyone to be stunned, as if they had fallen into a dream. The upper echelons of the 7 major forces were a little dazed. For a moment, they couldn't come back to their senses. He had killed so many heaven's favorites and killed his way out of the encirclement. If even such a heaven's favorite was considered trash, then how could the others live? In an instant, many gazes landed on Xia Yubing. Among these gazes, some were questioning, some were strange, some were mocking, and some were waiting for a good show. After all, from the very beginning, Xia Yubing had never concealed her ambition to become a sword master. Previously, he had spared no effort to smear Yiguchen's name, making him an existence that everyone despised. But now, the cowardly coward Yiguchen that Xia Yubing spoke of had not only appeared, he had even appeared right before Xia Yubing's eyes from start to finish. Furthermore, he had even displayed all sorts of astonishing accomplishments. This was undoubtedly a slap to Xia Yubing's face. Yiguchen didn't even need to say a single word to put Xia Yubing in an extremely awkward and ashamed state. Even those martial artists who had clamored for Xia Yubing to become a sword master felt their cheeks burn with pain. Their shouts were stuck in their throats, and the shock in their eyes didn't disperse for a long time. No. How is this possible? How is it possible that it's you, Dugu Yigu? If one were to talk about the person whose emotions were fluctuating the most at this moment, it would undoubtedly be Xia Yubing. When she saw the familiar yet unfamiliar handsome face under the human skin mask, Xia Yubing's mind went blank, as if 100,000 thunderbolts had exploded. She couldn't believe it, and she wasn't willing to believe it. The Yiguchen that she had always looked down on, and wanted to trample under her feet, was actually Dugu Wubai. One moment in heaven, one moment in hell. This kind of disparity, for Xia Yubing, was simply an extremely absurd feeling. When Yiguchen hadn't appeared at the start of the elite gathering, Xia Yubing was still sneering in her heart. She had thought too highly of Yiguchen, and didn't even dare to appear at the elite gathering. But now, looking at it, Xia Yubing felt like she was a clown. Everything she did was seen by Yiguchen, who had transformed into Dugu Wubai. Her countless schemes, her shrewdness, and her plan to seize the title of Sword Master were all shattered the moment Yiguchen revealed his true identity. Because Dugu Wubai's battle achievements were already enough to shock everyone. And Yiguchen revealing his identity at this moment caused his reputation to soar like the sun in the sky. After all, a single Dugu Wubai was already incomparably shocking. If this Dugu Wubai's true identity was still the sword master that had risen up once again, then his influence would be even greater. Yiguchen had only revealed his face, yet all of Xia Yubing's schemes had been destroyed, and it had even caused Yiguchen's reputation to soar. This enormous contrast made Xia Yubing's mind dizzy for a moment. She couldn't even stand steadily, and felt as if she was about to fall. Xia Yubing's expression continuously changed, alternating between green and white, and her face was filled with disbelief. Yiguchen faintly smiled as he touched his face, and said with an indifferent tone, Xia Yubing, how long has it been since you last saw me? Have you already forgotten what I look like? If it were someone who didn't know, they would think that it was a conversation between lovers who hadn't seen each other for a long time. However, in the past, Yi Guqin and Xia Yubing's relationship was indeed like that. But now, Yi Guqin's words only caused Xia Yubing's expression to become even more unsightly. She felt as if she had nowhere to vent her feelings of depression. Dugu Wubai. Yi Guqin. Heh, Yubing really is smart all her life but stupid this time. Xia Yubing tightly knitted her brows, and her jade-like hands clutched her chest. Her heart seemed to ache faintly. Of course, it wasn't because she was injured, but because her anger had attacked her heart. Those who humiliate others will be humiliated by others. Your schemes have been exhausted, and your life has been ruined. Yi Guqin pointed his meteor-soft sword at Xia Yubing. The atmosphere between the two seemed to have frozen. However, the shock in the hearts of the surrounding spectators still continued. Brother Yi, you really hid it from me. Chu Qingqi shook his head and smiled bitterly. On the side, Elder Qinghe's old face was also a little red. This was because he had some prejudice against the sword master who hadn't come yet. Now that his identity was revealed, he felt a little embarrassed. Only Feng Manla's face was calm, and he wasn't surprised at all. Although he was blind, his heart was as clear as a mirror. Perhaps he had already guessed this. As for the limitless sword sect, Lu Tianying's mind was in a mess, and he was speechless. He didn't expect that Dugu Wubai was the sword master who had made him lose face at the sword-seeking steel. However, at this moment, only fear was left in Lu Tianying's eyes as he looked at Yi Guqin. Just Dugu Wubai alone was enough to frighten him. At this moment, when the two identities were added together, Lu Tianying didn't dare to have any thoughts of revenge against Yi Guqin. Dugu Wubai is the sword master. With such a temperament, this boy is unfathomable. Xiantai was also very surprised. On the side, Xianying's pupils suddenly shrank. Yi Guqin was the second junior who could be evaluated by Xiantai as unfathomable. As for the first person, it was naturally the top genius of the Sun Moon Hall, Xianhao. This made Xianing unhappy, and at the same time, he also had a deep fear of Yi Guqin. In addition, Qin Baijian, and the other two spiritual bridge of heaven and earth experts who had been watching the battle all this time looked even more serious. The killing intent in their eyes became so strong that it couldn't be dispersed. This boy must die. Chapter 196. Among the tens of thousands of cultivators, Princess Yuanyang stood there in a daze. It's him. It's really him. The person I like will never disappoint me. Princess Yuanyang covered her red lips with her hands as her vision blurred. Yi Guqin, who had disappointed her, was actually Dugu Wubai, who had saved her life. This unexpected turn of events made Princess Yuanyang feel like she was in a dream. The person she was infatuated with would rise again like a blazing sun, even more dazzling than before. As for Princess Yuanyang, she could no longer have anything to do with Yi Guqin. There was another woman who felt the same way as Princess Yuanyang. It was Xia Shirshir. I finally understand what you mean by repaying the karma of that day. Xia Shirshir smiled as tears streamed down her face. Repaying the karma meant that they were no longer involved. How is this possible? That trash. He's actually Dugu Wubai. Xia Yinger was stunned as her mind went blank. She hated Yi Guqin, but she had a trace of respect for Dugu Wubai, who had saved her life. Xia Yinger couldn't accept this and felt like she was being torn apart. As for Song Daojin and Chu Shiqing, although they had some guesses, they couldn't be sure. Now that Yi Guqin's true identity was revealed, Song Daojin and Chu Shiqing could only look at each other with bitter smiles. They were once the 7 prodigies of the Milky Way province, but the gap between them and Yi Guqin was like heaven and earth. Yi Guqin and Xia Yubing were facing each other inside the true Qi barrier. The surrounding prodigies, Yuan Mia, Shinta Miao, and the others were also looking at Yi Guqin in astonishment. However, there were only 3 people who were the most shocked. One of them was Su Jianshi. She didn't expect that the taciturn youth who had traveled with her was Yi Guqin, the famous sword sex Yi Guqin. At the same time, he was the opponent that Su Jianshi wanted to spar with. Foolish brat, you actually deceived me for so long. I'll deal with you later, but... Su Jianshi glanced at Yi Guqin's handsome side profile with her heart beating wildly. He looks more handsome in person than in the mask. Su Jianshi's focus was different from the others. As for Murong Ditian, he was staring at Yi Guqin with a hateful gaze that seemed as if he was going to devour Yi Guqin. The grudges between him and Yi Guqin couldn't be resolved. Now that Yi Guqin had revealed his true form, Murong Ditian felt as if he was being toyed with. This was something that Murong Ditian was unable to accept. However, he did not act rashly because the threat that Yi Guqin posed to him now was even greater than before. As for the last person, it was the gray-robed man. When he saw Yi Guqin, his body trembled violently. It's actually you, young Master Yi. The gray-robed man whispered. If Yi Guqin were to hear this voice, he would definitely recognize it. However, right now, Yi Guqin clearly didn't notice the gray-robed man. His gaze was fixed on Xia Yubing. Although Xia Yubing's expression fluctuated and her emotions fluctuated violently, she gradually calmed down. Tens of thousands of cultivators from the 7 great forces were all looking at Xia Yubing and Yi Guqin. There was no need to talk about the enmity between them. Yi Guqin, you have indeed surprised Yubing. Yubing didn't expect that you, who viciously plotted against me in the Sword Monarch's secret realm, would actually appear in front of me as if nothing had happened. Xia Yubing bit her red lips lightly. There wasn't the slightest bit of hesitation when she said these words that inverted black and white. It was as if this was the truth. Not only that, there seemed to be a bit of mist appearing in her ice-blue eyes. Xia Yubing was crying? Many cultivators were stunned for a moment. One had to know that Xia Yubing's temperament had always been cold and calm. She was like a fairy exiled from a snowy mountain. She didn't show much emotion. A little girl's action like crying had almost never appeared on Xia Yubing's face before. However, she was crying now. Sparkling teardrops hung on her eyelashes. She wasn't crying loudly, but her faint sobbing was even more heart-wrenching. Yeah, so what if this Yi Guqin appeared? Previously, Lady Xia and this Yi Guqin were publicly acknowledged as Dao companions. In the end, Yi Guqin went crazy and plotted against Lady Xia in the Sword Monarch's secret realm. With such a person, no matter how strong he is, it's hard for him to bear the title of Sword Master. It was unknown where such a voice came from among the many cultivators. Yeah, even an ice fairy like Lady Xia could be so ruthless as to plot against her, all for the sake of monopolizing the Sword Monarch's inheritance. This Yi Guqin's character is so insidious. What qualifications does he have to be a sword master? At first, it was only 1 or 2 people. Later, many cultivators began to curse. At this moment, Xia Yubing was like a pear blossom in the rain. Her sobbing appearance was indeed pitiful. Some of the male warriors who were infatuated with Xia Yubing even wanted to rush into the real Qi shield and fight Yi Guqin to the death. Yi Guqin is a hypocrite. He plotted against Fairy Yubing. He's a despicable person. How can such a person be a sword master? It seemed that someone had fanned the flames. The situation that had been overturned by Yi Guqin seemed to be reversed again. You, shameless. Su Jianshi was furious. She gritted her teeth and felt wronged for Yi Guqin. She knew very well what kind of person Yi Guqin was. However, among the tens of thousands of cultivators, there were still people who continued to curse. However, there were also some who remained on the sidelines and watched the situation develop. Things are getting more interesting now. The upper echelons of the 7 major factions were clearly not ignorant people. However, they didn't stand out either. They only watched the contest between the two. No matter who won in the end, it didn't matter to the 7 major factions. Only the prodigy who won in the end was qualified to gain their favor. Yi Guqin's expression didn't change amidst the cursing. He turned his gaze to Xia Yubing. Xia Yubing covered her face with her jade-like hands and seemed to be crying. However, the corners of her mouth curved into a mocking smile. She was clearly mocking Yi Guqin. Yi Guqin shook his head slightly. He had underestimated this scheming childhood sweetheart of his. Xia Yubing, I have to say that you've exceeded my expectations. I can't compare to you in terms of scheming. Yi Guchen was very calm amidst the harsh cursing. With Yi Guchen's sword demon temperament, there were very few situations that could make him emotional. This bit of cursing was almost negligible to Yi Guchen. Yubing doesn't know what you're talking about. However, your attitude and actions have made Yubing's heart extremely cold. Xia Yubing raised her jade-like hands and wiped away her tears. However, there was a trace of mockery in her eyes that only Yi Guchen could see. No need to put on an act. Don't you want my life? I'm right here. Let's fight. Yi Guchen held his calamity dust sword horizontally. The tip of the sword was suffused with a cold light. Xia Yubing's eyes flashed. The surrounding prodigies seemed to have sensed something. One of them opened his mouth and said, Yi Guchen, a despicable person like you actually dares to make a move against Fairy Yubing. We can all cut down a malignant tumor like you. Following this prodigy's roar, a total of 5 prodigies in the surroundings erupted at the same time. True Qi surged out and attacked Yi Guchen. In the blink of an eye, the 6 prodigies released their killing moves and attacked Yi Guchen. This sudden scene was out of everyone's expectations. However, Yi Guchen seemed to have sensed something. He sneered and said, You're still hiding this move? Xia Yubing, you're really meticulous. However, Yi Guchen attacked. The Calamity Dust Sword's 42 weapon meridians lit up. At the same time, the Broken Edge Spirit Mark and the Violent Thunder Spirit Mark were activated. In an instant, the Calamity Dust Sword was surrounded by lightning. Cold light filled the sky, as if it could shatter the void. Wind Stab. Yi Guchen attacked. Blood light filled the sky and cut the throat of a prodigy. When Tu Han. He walked leisurely and waved his sword horizontally. Sword light flashed and cut another prodigy into pieces. Who will drink with me? Yi Guchen recited a poem as his sword moved gracefully. A demonic sword pierced through the chest of another prodigy. Who dares to block me? The Calamity Dust Sword vibrated and the sword wave spread out, turning a prodigy in front of him into dust. The sword returns. The person will not return. As Yi Guchen's last sentence fell, the true qi in his body circulated. The Calamity Dust Sword emitted a monstrous bloodlight. It was as if the Azura Sword God had emerged from hell. God-slaying sword technique, Yellow Springs. The huge blood-colored sword river directly tore apart the bodies of the 2 prodigies in front of him. Blood filled the sky and fell like rain, accompanied by snow. What fell was bright red and dazzling snow. In the rain of blood, the sword demon was not stained by a single drop of blood. At this moment he was the blood hell Azura. At this moment he was the sword demon. The sword returns. The person will not return. The Calamity Dust Sword pointed directly at Xia Yubing. My sword Sexy Guchen does not ask for much. I only want to borrow your life. Chapter 197. The heavens and earth were silent, and the rain of blood was silent. Only Yi Guchen, with a sword in his hand, casually killed the 6 geniuses. How heroic was that? Many sword cultivators who were watching the battle were fascinated, and their eyes were filled with fervor. This was the highest realm of sword cultivators. Killing one person in 10 steps, leaving no trace for 1,000 miles. Even if all the geniuses came out, they wouldn't be able to stop the sword in Yi Guchen's hand. Where the sword pointed, life and death would be decided. Xia Yubing, let's fight. Yi Guchen's cold shout shook the 9 heavens. His feet stepped on the ground, and his true energy exploded. His body leapt up like a swan, and his sword flickered with cold light as it pierced towards Xia Yubing's head. All the grudges were laid down under the sword. Yi Guchen, you forced Yubing to this point. You're heartless, so don't blame Yubing for being unjust. Xia Yubing stopped crying. At this moment, her icy blue eyes were incomparably cold, as if she had returned to her previous state of an ice goddess. As long as I can kill you, all obstacles will be swept away, Xia Yubing said coldly in her heart. She took out the glacier sword and slashed out as well. One was the famous sword cultivator genius of the Saint Origin dynasty, the sword master Yi Guchen, who had risen again after the fall of his halo. The other was the North River Sword King's inheritance, Xia Yubing, who had appeared out of nowhere as a genius. This duel would attract everyone's attention. Even Yuan Mia, Shen Miao, and the other geniuses had retreated far away to the edge of the true energy barrier to make space for the two, because they knew that this was the destined battle between Yi Guqin and Xia Yubing. Clang! The Calamity Dust Sword and the Glacier Sword clashed, and the sound of metal clashing resounded. The surging and sharp sword chi spread out in all directions. It was just a single strike, but the ripples were extremely violent. The spreading sword chi made the scalps of some of the martial artists go numb. Ninth cycle of chi refinement. Your realm is inferior to mine. Xia Yubing's sword shook, and she only took half a step back. On the other hand, Yi Guqin took 2 steps back. One's cultivation level is not everything. Yi Guqin once again charged forward with his sword. His eyes were cold, and his moves were also extremely vicious. Futile. Xia Yubing shook her head slightly. Even though Yi Guqin had the achievement of killing Qin Aoshi, in her eyes, he was still slightly inferior. She already had a half-step divine soul cultivation, and was able to use her soul force. This was also one of Xia Yubing's methods. However, there seemed to be a faint fluctuation spreading out from her icy blue eyes. Yi Guqin instantly felt as if there were countless people whispering in his mind, irritating him. This level of influence is useless against me. Yi Guqin's pitch-black eyes were instantly swallowed by the color of blood. Eye of Azura, activate. At the same time, Yi Guqin used the soul-burning secret technique. An intense burning sensation came from the depths of his soul, causing Yi Guqin's face to pale slightly. But as the soul-burning secret technique was used, Yi Guqin's Eye of Azura became as dark as blood, causing one's heart to palpitate in fear. This, even with Xia Yubing's half-step divine soul cultivation, she was instantly stunned. In her mind, she seemed to see herself when she was young. She was all alone, leaning on Yi Guqin's back, hiding in the shadows, weak and powerless. This is an illusion technique. Xia Yubing bit her red lips, instantly sobering up. However, the killing move was already in front of her. God-slaying sword art, blood slaughter. The blood-red Azura power flowed over the tribulation dust sword, scarlet and dazzling. Yi Guqin's sword stabbed towards Xia Yubing's chest, not holding back in the slightest. So what if it's an illusion technique? Xia Yubing raised her sword to block, the tip of the tribulation dust sword touching the glacier sword. In the blink of an eye, the Azura power exploded and blood-red sword energy soared into the heavens. Pung! Xia Yubing's figure was blasted back. On her flawless face, there was only a tiny wound left behind by the sword energy. A drop of blood slid down her snowy face. The surrounding world was silent. Many martial artists looked at Yi Guqin in a daze. What happened just now? Why was Xia Yubing so absent-minded? Who knows? Could it be some sort of soul illusion technique? But Yi Guqin is only at the 9th revolution of energy refining, so how can he use his soul force? TSK, this Xia Yubing suffered a small loss. Although Yi Guqin's damage to Xia Yubing was minuscule, his cultivation was only at the 9th revolution of energy refining. There was still a large gap between him and a half-step divine soul. To be able to cause such a small amount of damage had already surpassed everyone's expectations. A secret technique? Xia Yubing stretched out a finger, wiping away the drop of blood. God-slaying sword art. Demon only. Yi Guqin's figure didn't stop. After using blood slaughter, he once again slashed out with his sword. This sword art, demon only. A fierce and unstoppable sword move rumbled toward Xia Yubing. Xia Yubing's icy true chi gathered. The glacier sword in her hand also emitted an endless cold light. Glacier sword art. Heavenly snow scattering splendor. Cold sword light suddenly spread out. It was as if the sky was filled with flying snow. Every sword light contained a terrifying might that could kill a 5th revolution of energy refining martial artist. Boom! Yi Guqin slashed out with his sword. The blood-colored sword light smashed through the numerous sword lights, heading straight for Xia Yubing. Xia Yubing's expression changed slightly. The might of the god-slaying sword art had exceeded her expectations. However, the situation was still within Xia Yubing's control. She slashed out again. Her entire body was filled with cold air. She had activated a trace of ice sword intent. Combined with the glacier sword art, the might was even more powerful. Glacier sword art, icicle break. Endless cold air gathered in front of Xia Yubing, transforming into an iceberg-like true qi phantom. Boom. Yi Guqin's soul demon sword landed on the ice mountain's shadow, with a loud boom. Gotcha! Although it was only formed from true qi, it was like a real iceberg. It actually started to crack. True energy condensation. That's a technique that only true divine soul powerhouses can use. This Xia Yubing only has a half-step divine soul cultivation, so how could she have such a manifestation? Some martial artists were incomparably shocked. However, how could they know that Xia Yubing was only able to do this with the help of a trace of ice sword intent? Retreat. Yi Guqin suddenly felt a sense of danger. The golden true qi in his qi sea surged out, condensing into the phantom of a guardian Vajra on the surface of his body. It was the spiritual rank defensive martial art, Luotian protection. Bang! The illusory iceberg exploded with a loud bang. Immediately after, countless icicles violently surged in all directions. Such a wide-range attack caused the faces of some of the geniuses within the true energy barrier to change drastically. Poochie! Some of the geniuses were affected and had their bodies pierced through by the icicles. This was only the periphery. Yi Guqin, who was in the center of the battlefield, received the most concentrated attacks. Boom! 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 The dense icicles bombarded the phantom of the guardian Vajra, causing ripples to spread out like water. A big killing move? Yi Guqin coldly said as he slashed out with his sword again. His calamity dust sword appeared. His sword move seemed to depict the trajectory of the Great Thousand World. Countless sword threads spread out, directly shattering the icicles in front of him. Great Thousand Sword Art? Xia Yubing was clearly not unfamiliar with Yi Guqin's sword technique. Her eyes revealed a strange light, and even more so, a deeply hidden hatred. She had once begged Yi Guqin to teach her the myriad sword canon and Great Thousand Sword Art. However, Yi Guqin did not teach her because of his father's warning when he was young. This was also one of the reasons why Xia Yubing had turned dark. This sword art of yours makes Yubing hate it. Xia Yubing's voice was as cold as water. She slashed out with her sword again, the might of her sword aura spreading out in all directions. She wanted to kill Yi Guqin. Chapter 198. Styx River Sword Art, Ice Phoenix Break. Xia Yubing's true qi gathered within her body. Dense ice true qi gathered on the glacier sword. Her weapon veins lit up, and at the same time, the ice spirit marks were activated, causing the already extremely cold sword qi to become even colder. An illusory sword qi ice phoenix wrapped around the glacier sword. Xia Yubing's sword pierced forward like a flying immortal. This was a small special move of a spirit-level sword art. Adding a trace of ice sword intent and the glacier sword support, its power multiplied by several times. At this moment, Xia Yubing's sword appeared. Wherever it passed, the ground would be covered in frost. Yi Guqin shook his blood and Azura force surged, causing the calamity dust sword to release an extremely glaring blood-red light. At the same time, the heavenly sun profound underworld fire surged out from his body, wrapping around him. It could slightly block the ice chi released by Xia Yubing. God-killing sword art, Yellow Springs. Yi Guqin also slashed out with his sword. True chi surged on the blood-red sword edge. The power of Azura fused with his true chi. It seemed to have transformed into a majestic Yellow Springs river as it rushed towards Xia Yubing. This was a clash of extreme moves, causing everyone to be unable to take their eyes off it. At the same time, their throats became dry. Such a powerful sword move made their scalps go numb. Boom. The blood-red sword light collided with the ice chi, erupting with a deafening explosion. Within the crisscrossing sword chi, Xia Yubing and Yi Guqin engaged in close combat. This pair of Golden Boy and Jade Girl of the Milky Way Prefecture, a couple envied by countless people, were now facing life and death. Only one of them could survive. Clang. A series of sounds of swords colliding rang out. Xia Yubing and Yi Guqin's sword attacks were shockingly fast. The spectating cultivators could only see streaks of afterimages, unable to see their movements clearly. These two are both terrifying. Even some sword cultivators who had been immersed in the way of the sword for a long time sighed at their own inferiority. Bang! Yi Guqin slashed out with his sword. Xia Yubing blocked it with her sword. However, he instead used wave-like subtle steps. As his figure flashed, he extended his other hand. True Qi surged, and he pointed towards Xia Yubing. Not good. Xia Yubing's expression suddenly changed. She sensed a type of danger. 6 Pulses Godly Sword. The true Qi in Yi Guqin's Qi followed the tendons and veins in his arm and gathered in his palm. In the end, it gushed out from his fingertips and transformed into streaks of sharp sword Qi, shooting explosively towards Xia Yubing's head. Mystic Ice Finger. Xia Yubing also used her finger martial arts. Streams of icy sword aura gushed out and collided with the 6-pulse divine sword aura. True Qi exploded. Yi Guqin used wave-like subtle steps again, using his sword techniques to entangle Xia Yubing while releasing the 6-pulse divine sword. That sword master is really something. He can actually split his attention to use finger techniques, while using sword techniques? Some of the warriors were stunned. Even the people from the 7 great factions were a little shocked. It was extremely rare to see such a multitasking method. Looks like you also have some tricks up your sleeve. Xia Yubing's expression became serious. Whether it was the 6-pulse divine sword or wave-like subtle steps, they were both top-tier martial arts. Xia Yubing had never seen them before. Thus, she became a little more vigilant towards Yi Guqin. Following Yi Guqin's multitasking technique, everyone was somewhat shocked to discover that Xia Yubing actually faintly showed signs of being suppressed. Seeing that victory seemed to be tilting towards Yi Guqin, Su Jianshi couldn't help but shout, "Silly boy, you can do it." It's not that simple. Xia Yubing is only probing. The two of them are trying to figure out each other's trump cards, said Bai Yanji as he gently fanned himself. Just when everyone thought that Xia Yubing had temporarily fallen into a disadvantageous position, she made her move again. Her lotus feet moved, and her speed increased by several times. This is a movement martial art. Seeing Xia Yubing's speed increase, Yi Guqin faintly frowned. The corner of Xia Yubing's mouth rose into a sneer. The traceless snow steps she used was the inheritance of the North River Sword King. It was a high-grade spiritual tier movement martial art, and its speed was unpredictable. So what if you're fast? Yi Guqin's blood-red eyes were like scarlet moons. His Azura words could slow down his opponent's speed. At the same time, Yi Guqin once again used the soul ignition secret technique, and illusions appeared in Xia Yubing's mind. Illusions? Yubing won't fall for it again. Xia Yubing also released her soul power to resist Yi Guqin's attack. Abyss River Sword Art, Sacred Ice Phoenix Image. Xia Yubing let out a delicate shout as she held her sword with both hands. Intense ice-cold true Qi gushed out, and vaguely, it condensed into an ice phoenix divine statue. The terrifying fluctuations emitted from it caused the corners of the eyes of the heaven prides who had retreated far away to twitch slightly. Go! Xia Yubing unsheathed her sword. A terrifying frost sword aura accompanied the ice phoenix statue's image as it rushed towards Yi Guqin. This was the ultimate move of a spiritual tier sword art. It was terrifyingly powerful. One had to know that Su Jianshi's spiritual tier sword art's ultimate move had forced back 3 sky prides of the same level. But now, Xia Yubing's cultivation was clearly higher than Su Jianshi's. Adding on the ice sword intent and frost true energy, this ultimate move's power was boundless. Yi Guqin took a deep breath in the face of this sword that made everyone tremble in fear. He unsheathed his tribulation dust sword and drew a circle. At the same time, he faintly added a trace of hard and soft sword intent. This extreme circle seemed to be able to contain and swallow all things. It was the Taiji sword art. Can Yi Guqin block this move? I feel like this move from the sword sect isn't that strong. The cultivators on the outside discussed. Compared to Xia Yubing's powerful sword move, Yi Guqin's sword move was silent and didn't fluctuate much. But it was this sword move that made Feng Manlu, Xian Tai, and the other peak experts frown. This sword technique is interesting. I've never heard of it before. Although Feng Manlu was blind, his soul perception was sharp. Moreover, he had immersed himself in the sword Dao for many years, so he could naturally sense the flow of sword aura. Seeing Yi Guchen's simple sword move, Xia Yubing didn't relax in the slightest. Boom! The Ice Phoenix sacred image fiercely collided with Yi Guchen's sword. The frost sword aura instantly spread out, causing Yi Guchen's hands to stiffen. The web between his thumb and index finger was torn by the violent force, causing blood to flow out. Poochie! Yi Guchen spat out a mouthful of blood as he retreated several steps. He couldn't stop himself at all. The sword sect is about to lose. Some people exclaimed. Yi Guchen retreated several dozen steps, coughing blood from the corner of his mouth. But his gaze was sharp, his expression serious, and his Dantian sea of qi started to circulate. Yi Guchen stomped the ground fiercely. With a boom, Yi Guchen's retreating figure suddenly stopped. His feet sank deeply into the ground, but he still managed to receive this move. Xia Yubing raised her eyebrows. Yi Guchen's performance exceeded her expectations. Xia Yubing, I'll return all of your sword moves to you. Although there was blood at the corner of Yi Guchen's mouth, he wasn't dispirited at all. The Taiji sword technique was about borrowing force to fight force. As long as one could receive this sword move, they would be able to reflect it. Go! Yi Guchen swung his sword with all his strength. The terrifying sword move that had been swallowed by the Taiji sword technique actually spread out again, rushing towards Xia Yubing. Such an unforeseen event caused Xia Yubing to be momentarily stunned. She circulated the true energy in her body and hurriedly blocked with her sword. Bang! Xia Yubing's figure was blasted back, a faint trace of blood flowing from the corner of her mouth. All of the spectating fighters felt their hearts rise. This battle was simply impossible to take their eyes off. Just a moment ago, Yi Guchen was still coughing up blood, and in the blink of an eye, Xia Yubing was injured again. This is truly a fierce battle between dragons and tigers. Exciting! Someone from the 7 great powers clicked his tongue and sighed. Yi Guchen, you have indeed exceeded Yubing's expectations. However, the outcome will not change. Xia Yubing slowly raised her hand, and dark blue formation patterns appeared. As Xia Yubing pressed her hand down, the formation patterns extended along the ground covered in frost and snow. That is, Yi Guchen's pupils constricted. Heavenly frost flowing snow sword formation. Xia Yubing shouted clearly, and the light of the formation patterns surged. The wind and snow in the surroundings seemed to have been summoned, transforming into thousands of flying swords of ice and snow, shooting towards Yi Guchen in unison. This was Xia Yubing's hidden killing move. Chapter 199. The runes of the sword array spread. Accompanied by a sky full of snow, tens of thousands of sparkling and translucent flying swords shot towards Yi Guchen. This was a true attack of tens of thousands of swords. Mid-grade mortal-grade sword array. Feeling the power of this sword array, Yi Guchen's expression changed slightly. This heavenly frost-flowing snow sword array was even stronger than the little Ashura sword array he had used before. This was a sword array that could threaten even divine soul experts. Yi Guchen also had a sword array. It was the 6 Paths Ashura sword array he had obtained in the 18 Blood Prison. However, the 6 Paths Ashura sword array's level was too high. It was an Earth-grade sword array that could threaten Divine Palace and Celestial Palace experts. It was not something Yi Guchen could activate right now. Xia Yubing is only at the half-step Divine Soul realm. If she wants to activate this mid-grade mortal-grade sword array, she won't be able to last for long. Yi Guchen's eyes flashed as he thought of a countermeasure. Oh, is delaying tactics of any use? Since Yubing has activated her sword array, she can naturally kill you. As if she had seen through Yi Guchen's strategy, Xia Yubing's lips curved up in a cold smile. She raised her jade hand and the sparkling and translucent flying swords that filled the sky flew with her hand. Then they surrounded Yi Guchen from all directions. Yi Guchen displayed his Taiji sword art. His sword drew a circle, as if it wanted to completely destroy these flying swords. However, Puchi, a sparkling and translucent flying sword, cut through Yi Guchen's arm, leaving behind a bloody wound. Another flying sword cut through Yi Guchen's cheek, leaving behind a trail of blood. Although these sparkling and translucent flying swords were not real and were condensed from ice true qi, their power could not be underestimated. Moreover, the flying swords came from all directions. The Taiji sword art could not completely defend against them. It's over. I didn't expect Xia Yubing to have a mid-grade mortal grade sword array. This is a sword array that can deal with divine soul experts. Yi Guchen is in danger. Some martial artists who maintained a neutral attitude shook their heads. She's actually capable of activating a mid-tier soul-tier sword formation. This Xia Yubing has concealed her strength quite deeply. Some of the higher-ups of the 7 great powers sighed. Foolish kid. Su Jianshi's eyes were filled with worry as she clenched her fists in front of her chest. Trust in young Master Yi, Zither Fairy consoled. However, even they sighed. Even Yuan Mia, Shinta Miao, and the others would not feel good if they were trapped in such a sword formation. Yi Guchen, you can just die inside. Murong Ditian's gaze was filled with bone-deep hatred and was extremely cold. Yi Guchen was trapped in the center of the sword formation, and the flying swords that filled the sky shot toward him like rain. Even with the Taiji swordsmanship, Yi Guchen was still injured in many places. Yi Guchen, it's over, said Xiaoyu coldly as she watched Yi Guchen being tossed around by the thousands of ice swords. Oh, is that so? Yi Guchen's figure suddenly stopped as he slowly raised one of his hands, as if he was about to execute some kind of ultimate move. What other moves do you have? Xia Yubing's gaze focused. Maintaining the heavenly frost-flowing snow sword formation consumed a lot of her energy, so she had to kill Yi Guchen in the shortest amount of time possible. However, facing the ice swords that filled the sky, Yi Guchen had instead stopped dodging. Heaven-splitting sword soul, come out. Yi Guchen circulated the true energy within his body. Shortly after, a green sword soul surged out from his body like a torrent. It was as if a green river had rushed out from his body. The surging sword chi shook the surroundings. With Yi Guchen's current cultivation, he could activate 5,000 heaven-splitting sword souls at full power. The more heaven-splitting sword souls there were, the more powerful they would be. The powerful heaven-splitting sword soul scattered in all directions, as if it could cut through the void. The ice swords that filled the sky and fell towards Yi Guchen all collided with the heaven-splitting sword souls, causing rumbling sounds to erupt. However, with the heaven-splitting sword souls, the heavenly frost-flowing snow sword formation was actually unable to obstruct Yi Guchen at all. What kind of move is this? Some warriors were dumbfounded. Especially some sword cultivators. They had no idea what the sword chi that came out of Yi Guchen's body was. This is... Feng Manlu of the Sword Sect's Forest of Pagodas frowned slightly. When Yi Guchen took out 5,000 heaven-splitting sword souls, Xia Yubing's expression also changed slightly. Maintaining the heavenly frost-flowing snow sword formation required a lot of true energy and soul power. However, Yi Guchen's heaven-splitting sword souls only consumed true energy. With Yi Guchen's 1,000 feet long energy sea, he could completely support the consumption. This is a little troublesome. Xia Yubing's beautiful eyes narrowed slightly. Only now did she truly look at Yi Guchen seriously. This Yi Guchen, who was crippled by Gu Xiaoyang and rose again, made Xia Yubing feel that she was out of control for the first time. She held her sword and attacked, the tip of her sword filled with cold air. As the ice swords that filled the sky and the heaven-splitting sword souls collided, Xia Yubing and Yi Guchen once again fought. The swords intersected, dazzling the eyes. Outsiders were unable to catch the speed of their swords. When Xia Yubing attacked with her sword, snowflakes and frost splashed out. Xia family's frost sword arts. You actually know how to use Xiantian sword arts? Yi Guchen was astonished. Xia Yubing smiled coldly. The glacier sword vibrated and an extremely cold sword chi soared into the sky. The surrounding land was covered in white frost. This was the frost sword art's ultimate move. Are you trying to show off to me? You want to humiliate me with your Xiantian sword arts? Yi Guchen thought to himself. At the same time, his gaze was extremely sharp. He also attacked with his sword. The sword shadow was as fast as daylight. Aurora Fast Sword's ultimate move, Waning Rainbow. With Yi Guqin's current strength and comprehension, he could easily comprehend the Xiantian sword art's ultimate move. You actually have the face to use my Xia family's sword arts? Xia Yubing coldly scolded. The two ultimate moves collided. The Frost sword arts exploded with an extremely cold air, while the Aurora Fast Sword was unbreakable. It directly broke through the tip of the glacier sword. In front of Xia Yubing, a white jade-like tortoise shell appeared. There were spirit patterns engraved on it. As the spirit patterns blossomed with divine light, the tortoise shell suddenly expanded. It was like a white jade shield, blocking Yi Guqin's sword. The sound of metal clashing resounded. Spirit pattern defensive divine weapon? Yi Guqin raised his eyebrows. At the same time, the power of ice and fire surged around his body. The ice and fire dragon crystal armor instantly covered his body. Bang! The two retreated at the same time. Yi Guqin's face slightly paled. Although he had the ice and fire dragon crystal armor protecting his body, he was still injured by the recoil. Xia Yubing also retreated continuously. The white tortoise shell was also hit by the recoil and crashed towards her. Looking at the battle that had almost sunk into a state of panic, many spectators held their breaths. They didn't dare to breathe loudly. Yi Guqin looked at the unfathomable Xia Yubing opposite him and sighed inwardly. He had to admit that Xia Yubing was indeed an opponent that couldn't be underestimated. The origin ring on his finger flashed, and the meteor soft sword also appeared. And Yi Guqin actually took out another sword. What is he going to do? Some people were puzzled. Could it be a two-handed sword? But I've never seen Yi Guqin use it before. Moreover, if it's a two-handed sword, one of his hands must be slightly unfamiliar with it. Looking at Yi Guqin holding a sword with both hands, some sword cultivators shook their heads. Although a two-handed sword was twice as powerful as a one-handed sword, it was easy to control. If the two hands were not coordinated well, it might even have the opposite effect. They had never seen Yi Guqin use a two-handed sword, so they didn't think much of it. Do you think you can defeat Yubing just because you have an extra sword? Looking at Yi Guqin, who was holding a sword with both hands, Xia Yubing couldn't help but find it funny. We'll know once we try. Yi Guqin's expression was cold and solemn. He didn't say anything else, and used both hands to attack at the same time. His left hand used the Boundless Heaven Sword Art's minor skill, Boundless Wheel. His right hand used the God-slaying sword art, Solitary Demon. It was the dual sword divergence move. Two extreme moves were used at the same time. Sword Chi rushed to the 9 heavens. At this moment, everyone's expression changed drastically. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.